The Tao Te Ching is not a book you read, it's a truth you feel. Written by the ancient sage Lao Tzu over 2,500 years ago, it whispers a path to freedom, peace, and untouchable strength, not by conquering the world, but by surrendering to it. The Tao, or way, is not something you control. It flows like a river, moves like the wind, lives like breath. The more you try to grasp it, the more it slips through your fingers. And yet, when you let go, truly let go, you become one with it. The Tao Te Ching. The Tao Te Ching teaches that effort is not the way. Control is not the way. The harder you push, the more resistance you create. The strongest tree breaks in a storm. The supple reed survives. Power lies in stillness. Influence grows from quiet humility. Action becomes unstoppable when it flows from non-action. This is not weakness. It's the fiercest kind of wisdom, the kind that bends so it doesn't break, that gives so it cannot be taken from. In a world obsessed with noise, the Tao invites silence. In a culture racing forward, it shows the power of stillness. When the ego demands center stage, the Tao shows the strength of invisibility. When life feels overwhelming, chaotic, and beyond understanding, the Tao doesn't offer answers. It dissolves the questions. And somehow, in that surrender, a deeper knowing rises, one that can't be spoken, but lives in every breath, every moment, every choice to flow instead of fight. The Analects. The Analects is not a book of commandments. It is a mirror of character. Attributed to Confucius and his disciples, it doesn't tell you what to believe. It challenges who you are when no one is watching. It speaks in fragments, short, piercing reflections that cut through centuries with startling clarity. It doesn't scream, it doesn't argue. It simply asks, are you a person of virtue or a person of appearance? Confucius believed that greatness isn't found in power, brilliance, or fame, but in Ren, a quiet, unwavering humaneness. The Analects teaches that morality begins in the smallest places, how you speak to a servant, how you honor your parents, how you handle insult without retaliation. True leadership isn't about commanding others, it's about mastering the self. You don't become noble by birth, but by discipline, by ritual, by humility. To live rightly is to shape your soul every single day through the refinement of your actions. What makes the Analects so arresting is its simplicity. There's no poetry here, no metaphysics, just a cold stare into your own behavior. The gentleman is ashamed to let his words outstrip his deeds. When you see someone better than yourself, turn your thoughts to becoming his equal. It's a text that doesn't comfort, it confronts. You begin to notice how little virtue is in your reactions, how much ego rides your every word, and somehow this ancient voice from 500 BCE pierces through the noise of modern life to whisper the most haunting question, are you as good as you pretend to be? The Bhagavad Gita. The Bhagavad Gita is one of the most piercingly intimate and soul-wrenching dialogues ever written, disguised as a war story. At its core, it is not about armies or weapons, but the brutal inner war between fear and duty, illusion and truth, ego and eternity. It begins not with strength, but with collapse. A warrior, Arjuna, drops his bow, trembling before battle, not from cowardice, but from conscience. And in that paralyzed moment, the voice of Krishna breaks through, not as a God commanding faith, but as the inner voice of unshakable clarity. The Gita doesn't tell you what to feel. It reaches inside and drags you through your own contradictions. It reveals how deeply we are tied to outcomes, addicted to praise, enslaved by success, terrified of failure. Krishna offers no escape, only fire. Act without attachment. Do without needing to win. Serve without craving reward. This is not about detachment from life. It is about standing in the center of it with unwavering grace, doing what must be done even when the heart breaks. The Gita teaches that your soul is not this body, not this name, not this story you've clung to. It is unborn, untouched, and eternal. And yet, that eternal soul must act boldly, selflessly, fiercely. Every line is a blade that cuts through illusion, identity, ambition, even morality as we know it. It dares you to rise, not in rage, but in stillness, to fight, not for glory, but for the sacred duty of being fully, devastatingly alive. Heraclitean Logos. The Heraclitean Logos is one of the most haunting and paradoxical ideas in the history of thought, a philosophy that doesn't ask you to believe, but to feel the burn of existence itself. At its core lies a truth so raw, so unsettling, that it unravels the illusion of stability. Everything flows, everything changes, nothing stays the same. You cannot step into the same river twice because the river is never the same, and neither are you. This isn't poetry. It's a confrontation with the very nature of being. Heraclitus didn't see chaos and change. He saw order. Behind the endless transformation of the world, he sensed a hidden rhythm, a deep current, an unseen logos that binds opposites and drives all becoming. Fire was his metaphor for reality, not just because it destroys, but because it transforms. Creation and destruction are not enemies. They are partners in a sacred dance. The Logos is not a god to be worshipped. It is a law to be realized, a cosmic intelligence that whispers through contradiction. Life is not either or. It is both, joy and grief, peace and war, life and death. They do not cancel each other out. They depend on each other. Heraclitus forces you to see the beauty in tension, the clarity in conflict, the wisdom in impermanence. This philosophy doesn't offer comfort. It offers fire. It asks you to look directly into the unstable, flickering world around you and within you and find meaning in the movement, not despite it. To live the Logos is to let go of certainty and walk into the storm, knowing the storm is truth. Parmenidean. Parmenidean being is one of the most radical, mind-warping, and immovable ideas ever carved into the landscape of philosophy. At its core is a simple, terrifying claim. Change is an illusion. Motion is a lie. Becoming is impossible. What truly exists, being, is eternal, indivisible, and unchanging. And anything that isn't being, it simply isn't. Non-being cannot be thought, cannot be spoken, cannot be real. This is not abstract wordplay. It's an earthquake beneath everything you think you know. Your body ages, people leave, worlds crumble. Yet Parmenides says all of that is a trick of perception. There is no birth, no death, no before or after. There is only being, whole, timeless, solid as a stone in the void. The senses deceive, reason must correct, and reason whispers that change is impossible because it would require something to come from nothing. He doesn't ask you to agree, he dares you to disprove it. To truly grasp Parmenides is to feel your identity begin to disintegrate. The person you were 5 minutes ago, gone. The future you're imagining doesn't exist. The only reality is now, but not a fleeting now, a frozen, eternal now that never began and will never end. This philosophy doesn't feel human. It feels cosmic, brutal, alien, and yet, beneath its cold logic lies a strange kind of peace. If nothing ever truly changes, then nothing is ever lost. If all is being, then you are already complete, already infinite, already home in a universe that never moved and never had to. Atomism is one of the most radical, mind-bending philosophies ever conceived, a vision of the universe that strips away all illusion and tells you, without apology, that everything you love, fear, build, and lose is made of tiny, invisible, indestructible pieces, atoms. First imagined by Leucippus and Democritus over 2,000 years ago, it wasn't just a scientific guess. It was a philosophical detonation. It shattered the idea that the world was guided by divine will or fate. Instead, it said, The cosmos is governed by necessity, by motion, by matter in constant collision. You are not a soul in a sacred drama. You are a constellation of atoms dancing in the void. So is the sea, so is fire, so is every heartbreak, every kiss, every death. The same atoms that form your tears form stars and will someday scatter into other bodies, other dreams. There is no permanence, only patterns, no heaven, no underworld, just infinite rearrangement. And yet, in that stark vision lies a strange kind of liberation. If nothing is eternal, then nothing owns you. If the gods do not steer your fate, you are free. Death is not a punishment, it is a dissolution. Fear loses its grip when you understand. Nothing lasts, but nothing truly disappears. Atomism doesn't whisper comfort, it screams clarity. It breaks down the world into its smallest parts, not to destroy meaning, but to show that even in a soulless physical universe, beauty exists. In the random swirl of atoms, you are a fleeting miracle of form, and that, somehow, is enough. Platonic Forms. The theory of Platonic Forms is one of the most staggering and otherworldly visions of reality ever conceived. At its core, it whispers that everything you see, everything you touch, love, hate, or fear is just a shadow, a faint echo of something perfect, eternal, and utterly beyond this world. According to Plato, the things we call real are merely imitations, imperfect reflections of higher truths that exist outside time, space, and decay. This is not just philosophy, it is a rupture in perception. The moment you understand it, the world begins to look hollow. A beautiful painting is not beauty itself. A just law is not justice itself. These ideals, beauty, justice, goodness, truth, do not live in our world. They live in the realm of the forms, and we only know them as prisoners know firelight on a cave wall, dim flickers of something vast and unreachable. The most terrifying part? We've seen these forms before. Plato claimed your soul once lived among them, before birth. That ache you feel when something is almost right, but not quite, that longing for a truth you can't name, a perfection you've never touched, but somehow remember, that's your soul, mourning the world it left behind. And everything beautiful in this life is only beautiful because it reminds you of that lost origin. This idea doesn't comfort, it wounds. It makes you fall in love with something you can never fully grasp. The forms pull at your heart like a phantom limb, demanding not that you possess truth, but that you pursue it with everything you are, even if you never arrive. The Republic. The Republic is one of the most daring and disquieting blueprints for a just society ever imagined. At first glance, it reads like political theory, but beneath its surface, it is a psychological X-ray of the soul. At its core lies a single unrelenting question. What would a society look like if justice, not power, not profit, was its foundation? Plato doesn't answer with slogans. He builds a world, layer by layer, lie by lie, truth by truth. He begins with shadows on a cave wall. Most people, he says, are prisoners, chained, distracted, sedated by illusion. What they think is real is only a reflection. And when one prisoner escapes, climbs into the light, and sees truth, it burns. Enlightenment in the Republic is not pleasant. It is painful. To see clearly is to suffer first. But once you've seen the sun, once you've touched the truth, you can never go back. Plato's ideal city is not democratic. It is ruled by philosopher kings, those rare souls who've climbed out of the cave and returned, not to dominate, but to guide. Justice, he says, isn't about laws or punishments. It's about harmony. When every part of the soul does its proper work and every part of society fits into place, reason should rule spirit and desire, just as wisdom should rule courage and appetite. But the Republic is not a utopia. It's a challenge, a mirror, a warning. It shows you the cost of truth, the burden of reason, and the loneliness of those who see the world as it really is. It doesn't promise justice. It dares you to become it. Symposium. Symposium is one of the most seductive and soul-exposing philosophical works ever written, disguised as a drinking party. Beneath the laughter, the flirtation, the wine-soaked speeches lies a devastatingly raw exploration of love, beauty, and longing. At its core, Symposium is not about romance. It's about hunger, the aching, inescapable thirst we carry for something beyond ourselves. And Plato, through the voices of Socrates and others, rips open that hunger with terrifying precision. This isn't a gentle dialogue. It's a mirror that reflects your deepest desires back at you, stripped of illusion. Love, they say, begins in the body, in the skin, the eyes, the trembling of attraction. But it doesn't end there. True love doesn't cling. It climbs. From flesh to soul, from beauty to truth, from the specific to the eternal. The one you desire is only a spark, a glimpse of the divine form of beauty itself, which lives beyond space and time. And then Socrates tells Diotima's tale, and everything changes. Love isn't just an emotion, it's a ladder. Each step, each love, is a rung upward, meant to elevate the soul toward immortality. But it hurts, because to love truly is to be torn open, to see the infinite in the finite, and to ache for something you can never fully possess. What makes Symposium so haunting is that it reveals love as both a curse and a calling. It exalts love as the engine of all creation. Philosophy itself begins in that longing. It doesn't end with answers. It leaves you aching, breathless, staring into the fire of your own desire, wondering what it's really trying to become. Aristotle's Metaphysics. Aristotle's Metaphysics is one of the most ambitious attempts ever made to hold the entire universe in a single thought. At its heart lies a desperate hunger to know, not just what things are, but why they are. It is the philosophy of first causes, of what lies beneath every motion, every form, every breath. It begins not with answers, but with the most human of cries. All men by nature desire to know, and from that cry it climbs like fire toward the eternal. The metaphysics is not gentle. It pulls apart existence with surgical intensity. Everything, Aristotle says, has four causes: material, formal, efficient, and final. You are not just flesh. You are structure. You are action. You are purpose. And purpose, telos, is everything. Nothing is random. Nothing is without direction. Even the acorn is drawn by its end, the oak it is meant to become. At the core of it all is the unmoved mover, the ultimate cause, the source of motion that itself is not moved. Pure actuality, pure form. It does not act with hands. It draws all things toward it like a silent flame, not by force, but by desire. Everything moves because it wants. Everything is because it is reaching toward what it could be. This is not cold logic. It is yearning turned into metaphysics. The metaphysics doesn't just explain being. It reveals that everything longs to become, that beneath science, beneath matter, there is a trembling pull toward perfection, and that pull lives in you. Nicomachean Ethics. Nicomachean Ethics is one of the most quietly shattering philosophies of human life ever written. At first glance, it seems calm, even methodical, a structured guide by Aristotle for how to live well. But beneath its steady tone lies a demand that strips away excuses, illusions, and comforts. It doesn't ask what the good life is. It asks what kind of person you are becoming every single day. Aristotle doesn't offer abstract ideals. He offers habits, patterns, repetition. He insists that virtue is not a gift, but a practice, that you become just by doing just acts, brave by doing brave acts, generous by letting go of what is yours. You don't think your way into goodness. You train for it, like an athlete, moment by moment, choice by choice. There is no shortcut, no divine inspiration, only the slow, grinding work of becoming excellent. But what makes this work devastating is its clarity. Every day, you are either moving closer to your highest potential or further from it. Every decision either shapes you into someone worthy of happiness or warps you. And happiness, eudaimonia, isn't pleasure. It isn't success. It's the deep, unshakable alignment between your soul and your actions. It's the kind of joy that only comes when you have mastered yourself. The Nicomachean Ethics doesn't promise happiness to everyone. It offers it to those who earn it. It teaches that your character is your fate, that you will become what you repeatedly do. And in that truth, it hands you something rare and brutal, total responsibility, not for what happens to you, but for who you are when it does. Stoicism. Stoicism is one of the most powerful yet misunderstood philosophies for mastering the chaos of human life. At its core, it teaches a brutal but liberating truth. You control nothing but yourself, not other people, not outcomes, not even your own body, but your mind, your judgments, your choices, your response to pain and pleasure. That, and only that, is yours. Everything else is wind. It began in the Stoa of ancient Athens, but it was born in the battlefield of emotion. Stoicism doesn't ask you to suppress your feelings. It asks you to see through them. When anger rises, when fear grips, when grief cracks you open, don't run, don't obey, watch, dissect, question. Emotions are not commands, they are signals. The Stoic doesn't become unfeeling, he becomes unshakable. He walks into the storm and says, "This is not up to me, but how I face it is." The Stoic practices daily death, not morbidly, but to sharpen gratitude. He rehearses loss, not to feel numb, but to be prepared. He speaks little, listens much, and focuses on what can be done rather than what should have been. He is not a stone. He is a sword, tempered by fire, but still capable of cutting with clarity and purpose. In a world addicted to outrage, Stoicism is rebellion. In a culture drowning in distraction, it is discipline. It offers no fantasy, no heaven, no secret formula, only this: if you master your mind, no one can master you, and when all is taken from you, you will still possess the only thing that ever mattered, your freedom. Epicureanism. Epicureanism is one of the most wildly misunderstood and quietly liberating philosophies ever conceived. At first glance, it whispers of pleasure, of indulgence, of a life wrapped in softness. But beneath that surface lies a far more courageous truth: the pursuit of peace, the dismantling of fear, the audacity to believe that happiness is not only possible, but natural. Epicurus didn't preach luxury. He taught liberation from pain, from anxiety, from the tyranny of endless desire. At its core, Epicureanism is the art of knowing how little you actually need to be free. Pleasure, real pleasure, is not found in excess, but in simplicity. A warm meal, a loyal friend, a moment of stillness without fear. These are not distractions. They are the essence of the good life. The more you crave, the more you suffer. The more you chase, the more you're chained. Epicurus invites you to stop running, to turn inward, and to taste the joy of enough. But this philosophy doesn't stop at comfort. It aims straight at our darkest terrors, especially the fear of death. Epicurus slices it apart with calm, devastating logic. Death is nothing to us because when we are, it is not. And when it is, we are not. That realization alone can tear centuries of fear from your bones. You begin to live, not recklessly, but gently, intentionally, awake. Epicureanism doesn't seduce you with fantasies. It calls you back to your body, your breath, your brief shining moment on this earth, and asks, what if joy was not a reward, but a choice, a discipline, a way of being so simple it feels like a secret you were never taught to trust? Skepticism, Pyrrhonism. Skepticism, especially in its Pyrrhonian form, is one of the most quietly devastating philosophies ever devised. It doesn't rage, it doesn't preach, It doesn't even seek truth. It simply refuses to believe. At its core is a haunting realization that for every argument, there is an equal and opposite argument. For every so-called certainty, a crack in its foundation. And once you truly see that, once you feel it, certainty becomes a ghost you can no longer chase. Pyrrhonism doesn't ask you to reject belief out of cynicism, but out of mercy. Mercy for the mind exhausted by contradiction. Mercy for the soul crushed by dogma. Pyrrho, its originator, watched the world tear itself apart over what people claim to know. So he asked, what if peace lies not in knowing, but in letting go of the need to know? The skeptic trains his awareness like a blade, cutting through illusion, severing the ties to judgment, carving a space where the mind can rest, not in apathy, but in ataraxia, the deep undisturbed stillness that comes when you no longer need the world to be one way or another. You don't deny reality. You withhold assent. You meet life not with conclusion, but with a soft, impenetrable maybe. And in that space, stripped of opinion, untouched by dogma, there is a kind of freedom so rare it feels holy. Skepticism doesn't give you a lens. It removes the lens entirely. It is not doubt for doubt's sake. It is silence in a world screaming for certainty. And in that silence, the mind begins to breathe. Neoplatonism. Neoplatonism is one of the most mystically seductive and spiritually confronting philosophies ever born. At its core, it teaches that everything in existence, every soul, every thought, every atom of reality, is simply a fading echo of something infinitely greater, the One, not a God with a name or a face, not a being among beings, but pure, perfect unity, so complete it spills over into all creation. This is not religion. It is transcendence turned into logic, yearning turned into metaphysics. The world you see, touch, and suffer in, it is a cascade of emanations, like light diffusing through countless mirrors, each layer further from its source, more fractured, more dim, and yet, at the root of your soul, something burns with unbearable memory, a longing to return, to go inward, to ascend. For Neoplatonism, this is the deepest truth of being human, not to conquer the world, but to rise beyond it. It teaches that the self is not whole, not yet, that the intellect, no matter how sharp, is still bound by form, that beauty is not decoration, but a signal, an arrow pointing back to the divine. Love, too, becomes something sacred, not desire for another, but desire for what they reflect, the infinite. And so the journey begins, not by climbing mountains, but by turning inward, stripping away the layers of distraction, pride, sensation. The One cannot be seen, touched, or spoken of, but when you empty yourself of everything false, it rushes in like silence after a storm, pure, boundless, and terrifyingly still. Enneads. The Enneads is one of the most mystical yet intellectually piercing visions of existence ever conceived. At its core lies a philosophy that doesn't simply aim to explain the universe. It seeks to reunite you with its source. Written by Plotinus and compiled by his student Porphyry, the Enneads are not just teachings, they are a call to transcend everything you think is real, the material world, the body, even the mind. These are layers to be peeled back, illusions to be seen through. Beneath them lies the One, a presence beyond being, beyond thought, beyond words. The Enneads offer no comfort in identity, no permanence in matter. You are not your body. You are not even your intellect. You are a flicker of light descending from the One, fallen into fragmentation, aching for reunion. Every beauty you've ever seen, every moment that made you feel whole, every ache that felt too deep for language, that was the echo of home. The One is not a God in the sky. It is the silence beneath all things. It is not something you worship. It is something you remember. Plotinus doesn't ask you to study the world. He asks you to turn inward, radically, furiously, until the ego dissolves. He speaks of a journey so intimate it feels like vanishing, losing the self to find the source. Philosophy here becomes prayer. Intellect becomes ecstasy, and in the deepest stillness, beyond even thought, the soul rises, not with answers, but with vision, a glimpse of the divine not as a figure, but as the pure, blinding simplicity of unity itself. Confessions, Augustine. Confessions is one of the most brutally honest, spiritually feverish, and psychologically naked texts ever written. It isn't a memoir. It's a cry, a soul tearing itself open on the page. St. Augustine doesn't just recount his sins, he relives them, bleeds through them, claws at the roots of every prideful moment, every sensual indulgence, every whisper of rebellion against grace. This is not a saint looking down. It's a sinner collapsing upward, desperate to be caught by something eternal. At its core, Confessions is the story of a soul in exile from itself, restless, brilliant, seduced by pleasure and praise, yet haunted by a silence that nothing worldly could fill. Augustine was a man of status, intellect, lust, and still he was starving. Every conquest left him hollow. Every achievement echoed with the ache of absence. Our hearts are restless, he wrote, until they rest in you. And that sentence lands like thunder because it's not theology, it's agony turned truth. The brilliance of Confessions lies in its intimacy. Augustine doesn't just talk to God, he wrestles with him. He pleads, he accuses, he weeps. He walks you through his shame, not to flaunt his redemption, but to show you what it costs to be honest with yourself. And in that rawness, you feel the weight of your own evasions, your own hunger, your own longing for something more permanent than pleasure, more sacred than success. This isn't just a book about faith, it's about collapse. It's about the quiet, devastating moment when nothing in the world satisfies, and the terrifying hope that maybe God is not just watching, but waiting. City of God is one of the most thunderous declarations ever written against the illusion of earthly permanence, penned by St. Augustine as Rome crumbled under barbarian siege. It is not a lament, it is a revelation. At its core lies a terrifying and liberating truth. Every kingdom, every empire, every monument to human pride will fall. The city of man is built on sand. Only the city of God endures. Augustine doesn't whisper this message. He wields it like a hammer against every idol the world has ever worshipped. Wealth, glory, conquest, reason itself. What you see as strength, he says, is rot. What you call freedom is slavery to sin. What you think is peace is merely the lull before collapse. He watches the Roman Empire, once the immovable pillar of civilization, crack and shatter. And instead of mourning it, he points beyond it, past the ruins, past history, to a kingdom that cannot be seen, but can be lived. The city of God lives not in borders or thrones, but in the human soul aligned with divine will. It doesn't rise through violence, it grows through grace, and its citizens do not conquer, they endure. The suffering, the powerless, the meek, they are its builders. Every injustice suffered in silence, every temptation resisted in agony, every act of love offered in obscurity. These are its stones. Augustine doesn't offer escape. He offers perspective so vast, it shatters the illusion of control. When everything you love is burning, he asks, where do you belong? In the city that dies, or the one that cannot fall? Boethius' Consolation of Philosophy. The Consolation of Philosophy is one of the most piercing works ever written from the depths of despair. Composed by Boethius as he awaited execution in a dark prison cell, it is not a cry for pity. It is a defiant, luminous dialogue with the soul. Stripped of power, fame, and freedom, Boethius turns inward, and there, in the black silence of injustice, philosophy appears, not as theory, but as a woman radiant with reason, strength, and unshakable calm. She does not comfort him. She confronts him. She strips away the illusion that fortune is stable, that success means anything, that happiness can be built on things the world can give or take away. "Did you really think fortune was your friend?" she asks. "That wheel you rode so high on? It was always spinning." In her voice is not cruelty, but the harsh clarity of a storm clearing the air. This is not about surrendering to fate. It is about rising above it. Boethius learns that nothing external, no title, wealth, or even life itself, can define or destroy the self that lives by reason and virtue. The true good, philosophy says, is within, always has been, always will be. In this haunting text, joy and ruin sit side by side. Philosophy does not promise escape from suffering. She offers something deeper, the power to face it with dignity, to understand its place in the cosmic order, and to realize that even on the edge of death, the soul, anchored in wisdom, remains free. Islamic Neoplatonism is one of the most luminous and soul-splitting philosophical syntheses ever shaped, a fusion of divine revelation and ancient metaphysics that doesn't just ask what is true, but demands to know what draws the soul upward. At its core lies the breathtaking belief that all of creation flows from a single boundless source, God, not as a distant ruler, but as the overflowing perfection from which every layer of reality emanates in love and necessity. Building on Plotinus's vision of the One, Islamic Neoplatonists like Al-Farabi, Avicenna, Ibn Sina, and later Suhrawardi transformed this idea into a spiritually charged system where the cosmos becomes a ladder for the soul. Every level of reality is a mirror glimmering with divine light but darkened by distance. The further you descend from the source, the dimmer the light becomes. And yet, even in the lowest depths of matter, the echo of God still sings. What makes this philosophy so arresting is its inner fire, its ache to return. It teaches that the soul is not at home in this world, that its desires, its confusions, even its suffering are not errors, but signals. Your longing is the proof of your origin. The intellect, when purified, does not just understand God, it unites with Him. Through reason, through contemplation, through mystical ascent, you draw closer to the light that birthed you. Islamic Neoplatonism doesn't offer salvation through obedience alone. It demands inner transformation. It teaches that truth is not memorized, it is remembered, because once, long before the body, your soul stood in the presence of the real and has been burning for return ever since. The Incoherence of the Philosophers. The Incoherence of the Philosophers is one of the boldest and most incendiary philosophical detonations ever written, a direct assault on the arrogance of reason and the illusion of certainty. Penned by the medieval theologian and mystic Al-Ghazali, it tears through centuries of Islamic rationalism with the fury of a man who has tasted the limits of logic and found it wanting. It's not a gentle critique, it's a dismantling. At its core, this work is a scream against the cold confidence of philosophers who tried to cage the divine within the fragile walls of human intellect. Al-Ghazali watched as thinkers like Avicenna built dazzling towers of metaphysics and causality. Then he set them on fire, not because he was anti-intellectual, but because he believed something deeper, that the ultimate truths are not deduced, they are experienced. Revelation, not reason, is the true ground of knowing, and anything that claims to explain God in neat syllogisms is not wisdom, it's hubris. Al-Ghazali doesn't plead, he strikes. He exposes contradiction after contradiction in the theories of the philosophers. He dismantles their cosmology, their conception of causality, even their claims about the eternity of the universe. And in their place, he offers a vision of a world upheld not by natural law, but by divine will, where every atom moves because God wills it again and again. This philosophy doesn't soothe the rational mind. It shatters it. It dares you to step beyond intellect, to confront the terrifying beauty of a universe that cannot be tamed by thought. It leaves you shaken, unsure, and trembling before a truth too vast to be proved, only surrendered to. The Guide for the Perplexed. The Guide for the Perplexed is one of the most daring philosophical rescue missions ever undertaken, a lifeline for those suffocating between the weight of sacred belief and the pull of reason. Written by Moses Maimonides in the 12th century, it doesn't speak to the faithful or the skeptical alone. It speaks to the torn, to the restless souls who kneel in prayer with questions screaming behind their silence, to those who ache not from lack of faith, but from the unbearable tension between what they believe and what they know. At its heart, the guide is not a map, but a torch. It doesn't offer easy directions. It burns through illusion. Maimonides dares to say what many feared, that scripture veils truth in riddles, that the divine is not a person with moods, but pure intellect, beyond form, beyond comprehension. God, he insists, has no body, no passion, no change, and yet, somehow, is the source of all being. The Torah speaks in human terms because that is all we understand, but the truth it hides is terrifying in its silence. The guide walks the tightrope between philosophy and faith with breathtaking precision. It shows that reason isn't the enemy of religion, it is its purifier, that the literal reading of holy text leads not to enlightenment, but to idolatry, and that true understanding requires surrender, not of thought, but of ego. For the perplexed, the guide doesn't promise comfort, it promises light, dim, distant, often painful, but real. And for those willing to follow it into the dark, it offers something almost unbearable in its beauty, a God who cannot be seen, but can still be known. Summa Theologica. Summa Theologica is one of the most audacious and relentless pursuits of truth ever written. At its heart, it is not a dry catalogue of theology. It is a towering intellectual cathedral, built by Thomas Aquinas with logic as his chisel and faith as his flame. In a world divided between blind belief and cold skepticism, the Summa dares to ask the most sacred, most dangerous question: can reason reach God? Aquinas doesn't preach, he interrogates. Every page is a battlefield where objections clash with answers, where philosophy and theology wrestle not to destroy each other, but to uncover something deeper. He believed that faith is not the enemy of reason, but its fulfillment, that the eternal can be approached with the human mind, step by step, argument by argument, like a ladder reaching into the heavens. In the Summa, nothing is off limits. What is goodness? What is justice? What is the soul? Does God exist? What is happiness really? Each answer is dissected with surgical precision, never rushed, never assumed. Aquinas believed truth must be tested, strained, doubted, and then reconstructed, stronger than before. But what makes this work shatter expectation is its serenity. Aquinas does not rage or panic. He builds his arguments like stone arches, silent, immovable, and breathlessly exact. And at the center of it all is a single, luminous conviction that the human mind, properly formed, can touch the divine. That understanding, no matter how small, is an act of worship, and that love, pure, ordered, absolute, is not just a feeling, but the structure of all that is. Occam's razor. Occam's razor is one of the sharpest, most unsettling blades ever forged in the world of thought. Not a physical instrument, but a mental scalpel that slices through illusion, complexity, and noise with terrifying simplicity. At its core is a principle so deceptively calm it can shatter entire belief systems. Do not multiply entities beyond necessity. In other words, when faced with competing explanations, the simplest one, the one with the fewest assumptions, is most likely to be true. But this is not just a tool for science or philosophy. It is a brutal discipline of the mind, a refusal to be seduced by what is unnecessary, bloated, or ornate. Occam's razor demands a ruthless clarity. If an idea needs layers of excuses to stand, it should fall. If a belief survives only by piling on justifications, it must be cut. The razor does not care for comfort. It only cares for coherence. What makes it so emotionally jarring is how much it forces you to let go of cherished stories, of elaborate fantasies, of overcomplicated answers to questions you've been afraid to ask simply. It doesn't destroy meaning, but it insists you strip away what is false to reach what is real. And once you start using it, you begin to see the world differently. You stop clinging to what sounds impressive and start craving what actually holds. You begin to see how often complexity is camouflage, how often we hide behind the convoluted because the simple truth is too bare, too confronting, too undeniable. The razor does not soothe, it exposes, and once it touches your mind, you can never think the same way again. The Book of Healing, Avicenna. The Book of Healing is one of the most ambitious and intoxicatingly complex attempts to map the entire cosmos, from the trembling soul to the stars, using only the sharp edge of reason. Written by the Persian polymath Avicenna, it is not a book about medicine, despite its title. It is a remedy for the fractures of the mind, an antidote to intellectual chaos, a towering cathedral of logic, metaphysics, psychology, and theology, built stone by stone through pure thought. At its core, this work is a staggering act of philosophical faith, the belief that the universe, down to its most secret fibers, can be understood. Avicenna doesn't merely reflect on reality, he rebuilds it from the ground up. He begins with logic, because without clarity, there is no knowledge. From there, he crafts a metaphysical vision so bold it nearly drowns you, a necessary existent at the root of all being, from whom existence flows like light from the sun, effortless, infinite, indivisible. But the Book of Healing doesn't stop in the heavens. It dives into the soul, dissecting perception, memory, imagination, and the terrifying mystery of self-awareness. What is the soul? Is it body? Is it essence? Avicenna answers with the famous thought experiment of the flying man, a person suspended in void with no senses, who still knows I am. That moment cracks open the door to a soul that is immaterial, immortal, indivisible. This philosophy is not light reading. It is an ascent, a fierce climb toward the divine through sheer rational intensity. But for those who dare, it offers a glimpse of a world woven with meaning, precision, and purpose, where the soul doesn't just survive, it remembers what it truly is. Discourse on Method. Discourse on Method is one of the most explosive awakenings in the history of human thought, disguised in the quiet voice of a man simply trying to think clearly. René Descartes doesn't begin with certainty. He begins with doubt, radical, terrifying, all-consuming doubt. He strips away every belief, every truth, every assumption he's ever held until he stands alone in the void, mind naked, heart racing, wondering if anything at all is real. And then, in the silence of that abyss, a single truth echoes back. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. That simple phrase hits like lightning. It is not an argument. It is a scream from the core of existence. You can doubt the world, the senses, even your own body, but you cannot doubt the act of doubting. To think is to be, and from that unshakable core, Descartes begins to rebuild reality, not as a follower of tradition, but as a creator of clarity. Discourse on Method is not just about thought. It is about liberation. It teaches that true knowledge cannot be inherited. It must be earned. That truth does not lie in books, titles, or institutions, but in the disciplined fire of reason. Descartes offers a method, yes, but it's more than rules. It's a way of becoming someone who dares to question everything in pursuit of something that cannot be broken. This is not gentle philosophy. It is surgery of the soul, and when it's over, you are not left with answers. You are left with a burning mind and the terrifying power to think for yourself. Meditations on First Philosophy. Meditations on First Philosophy is one of the most radical and unnerving acts of intellectual destruction ever recorded. At its core, it is not about discovering truth. It is about demolishing everything that isn't. René Descartes begins not with certainty, but with terror, the terrifying possibility that everything you believe could be a lie, that your senses deceive you, that your memories mislead you, that even your most sacred beliefs may be nothing but dreams dressed in logic. So he does the unthinkable. He tears it all down. One by one, he discards the senses, the body, the world, even mathematics. Everything that could be doubted, he rejects. What remains is not clarity, but a void. And from within that void, a single truth emerges, quiet, shattering, inescapable, cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. It is not triumphant, it is primal, a lone ember of certainty glowing in the dark of annihilation. From that ember, Descartes rebuilds the world. Slowly, painfully, he reasons his way back to the existence of God, of truth, of the external world, but everything now rests on a foundation that can no longer be shaken. It is not faith, it is certainty earned through fire. This text doesn't offer comfort, it offers confrontation. It demands you question not just what you know, but how you know it. And when you stare into that abyss of doubt, it forces you to find a truth that cannot be taken from you, not by illusion, not by deception, not even by the collapse of reality itself. Leviathan is one of the most chilling, provocative, and cold-bloodedly honest political philosophies ever put to paper. Written by Thomas Hobbes in the shadow of war and chaos, it tears away every romantic notion of human nature and asks a question that rattles the bones. What are we really without power watching over us? His answer is not poetic, it is primal. Without a strong, absolute authority, life is not freedom. It is terror. It is the war of all against all. At the heart of Leviathan is a vision of humanity stripped of illusion. Hobbes paints a picture of the state of nature, where every man is his own law, where survival trumps virtue, and where fear, not morality, is the foundation of society. In this bleak light, even kindness is suspect, just a mask for self-preservation. There is no justice without force, no peace without control, so we give up our freedom, not out of loyalty, but out of desperation, to a sovereign who can protect us from each other and from ourselves. The Leviathan is not a monster to be feared. It is a god we created out of fear, a collective will so vast and singular that it commands obedience, not because it's right, but because without it, everything falls apart. Hobbes doesn't ask whether this is fair. He asks whether you want to survive. This philosophy doesn't comfort, it warns. It tells you that your civility is not natural, that order is not permanent, that beneath the surface of law and language lies a brutal truth. Peace is not the absence of violence, it is its containment. And the moment that containment weakens, Leviathan is all that stands between us and the abyss. New Organon. The New Organon is one of the most ruthless and revolutionary rejections of inherited wisdom ever penned, a declaration of war against the illusions of the mind and the decaying dogmas of ancient philosophy. Written by Francis Bacon in the 17th century, it is not a gentle reform of knowledge, it is a burning rebellion. At its core lies a single radical belief that truth cannot be inherited, it must be discovered. This work is a dismantling of the old ways, the old minds, the old methods. Bacon looked at the grand theories of Aristotle and the abstract speculations of the scholastics and saw not brilliance, but blindness. We had built castles of thought on foundations of fog. We worshipped logic but forgot reality. We argued about nature instead of touching it. The new organon is Bacon's weapon against that, an axe for clearing the overgrown forest of illusion so that a new science could rise, rooted in observation, not opinion. But this philosophy is not just intellectual, it is emotional. Bacon exposes the inner ghosts that haunt our thinking, idols of the tribe, of the cave, of the marketplace, of the theater. They are not myths. They are our biases, our arrogance, our language, our culture, and they bind us so tightly we don't even see the chains. The new organon is a call to awaken, to approach the world not with pride, but with humility before the facts. It dares you to reject comfort, to break from tradition, to become a seeker of knowledge that has never been known before. It is the philosophy of beginning again, of building a new world, not on what we think, but on what we can prove. Monadology. Monadology is one of the strangest and most electrifying visions of the universe ever imagined, a dazzling, unsettling attempt to explain all of existence through the tiniest, most indivisible spark of being, the monad. Written by Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz in 1714, it is not just a theory, it is a cosmic hallucination delivered with mathematical precision. At its core lies an idea both beautiful and unnerving. The universe is made not of matter, but of metaphysical souls, countless windowless monads, each reflecting the entire cosmos from within itself. The monad does not interact, it does not touch, push, or pull, and yet everything in the world unfolds in perfect coordination, like clocks wound at the same moment, ticking in harmony. There is no chaos, no chance, only the staggering intelligence of a pre-established order that pulses beneath all things. The physical world is not a chain of causes. It is a synchronized performance orchestrated by divine logic, too vast and too precise for us to see. This is not cold metaphysics. It is a vision of reality so intimate it borders on the spiritual. Every monad, no matter how small, holds within it a unique perspective of the universe, like a mirror reflecting infinity. And among these, the human soul is the most awake. We are not machines made of flesh. We are living ideas, points of perception in an eternal unfolding of meaning. Monadology doesn't demand belief. It forces you to question what you thought was real. It whispers that everything, your thoughts, your pain, your joy, is not incidental, but part of a flawless tapestry woven from infinite, unseen threads, threads that never touch, but always align. An essay concerning human understanding. An essay concerning human understanding is one of the most quietly explosive texts ever written, not because it shouts, but because it strips away the illusion that knowledge is something divine or automatic. At its core, John Locke's masterpiece declares a truth that still unsettles. The human mind is not born knowing. It is born blank, a tabula rasa. Everything you are, everything you know, everything you believe has been written on you by experience. There is no ancient wisdom buried in your soul, no eternal truths you carry from birth. You are not born noble or depraved, you are born empty. And into that emptiness, the world pours itself. Through sensation, reflection, trial, and memory, your mind is shaped, and that shaping becomes identity. That shaping becomes truth. Locke doesn't speak in riddles or metaphysics. He uses precision like a scalpel. He breaks down ideas into origins, thoughts into impressions, belief into structure. He exposes how we form concepts, how we confuse words with reality, how we mistake familiarity for certainty. He makes knowledge human, fragile, fallible, and entirely constructed. But beneath the calm analysis is a revolution. If everything in the mind comes from experience, then no one is born to rule. No one is born inferior. No priest, no king, no tyrant can claim divine authority, because truth is not inherited, it is earned. This essay does more than redefine knowledge, it redefines freedom, for if the mind is formed, it can also be reformed. and in that single, staggering realization lies the power to remake not just individuals, but entire civilizations. A treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge. A treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge is one of the most quietly explosive works in philosophy, a text that doesn't scream its revolution, but whispers it with unsettling calm. Written by George Berkeley, it takes the world you think you know, your body, your home, the trees outside your window, and dissolves it. At its core is a claim so radical, so disarming, it feels like a trap. Matter does not exist. The physical world has no substance outside perception. To be is to be perceived. Berkeley doesn't argue like a madman. He speaks with the measured tone of someone patiently sweeping away centuries of confusion. He asks, when you say something exists, a table, a tree, a mountain, what do you really mean? You've never touched matter itself. You've only experienced sensations, color, texture, weight, sound, and all of that lives in the mind. You cannot separate the thing from the experience of it. But the true shock of Berkeley's treatise isn't its logic. It's the psychological vertigo it creates. It pulls the floor out from under reality and leaves you floating in a world where nothing stands without a mind to hold it. And yet, he insists, this is not a descent into chaos. It is a deeper form of order, because behind every fleeting perception, every vanishing thing is a constant, eternal perceiver, God. This isn't skepticism. It's a faith in a reality far stranger and more intimate than we dare to believe, one in which the world is not a cold machine, but a thought sustained in divine awareness. And once you see it, the silence around you doesn't feel empty, it feels alive. Dialogues concerning natural religion. Dialogues concerning natural religion is one of the most daring, razor-edge explorations of faith ever written, delivered not as a sermon, but as a conversation sharpened into a blade. In this deceptively gentle dialogue, David Hume doesn't shout or accuse. He lets three voices speak: the rational theologian, the empirical skeptic, and the philosophical agnostic. And as they speak, the certainty of religious belief begins to tremble, not from ridicule, but from relentless, unflinching inquiry. At its core, this work confronts the most sacred of questions. Can human reason truly grasp the divine? Can we, trapped in time, limitation, and frailty, claim to understand the infinite? Hume dissects the design argument, the idea that the complexity of the world proves a divine creator, by showing how deeply human our assumptions are. We see order and purpose not because they are there, but because our minds want to see them. And when we try to map God in human terms, we reduce the infinite to a shadow of ourselves. The genius of dialogues is its calm intensity. It doesn't demand disbelief, it simply refuses easy belief. It forces you to stare into the void between reason and faith and ask yourself if your conclusions are truly yours or inherited habits dressed up as certainty. Hume's voice, masked behind characters, quietly devastates the foundations of dogma with surgical skepticism. This isn't atheism on the attack. It's reason in the dark, reaching towards something it cannot name. And in that reaching, Hume reveals a truth both terrifying and liberating, that the search for God may matter more than the answers we cling to. A treatise of human nature. A treatise of human nature is one of the most fearless and unsettling dissections of the human mind ever written. David Hume does not offer comfort. He peels back the skin of consciousness with surgical calm and shows us what lies underneath. Not reason, not purpose, but a chaos of impressions, sensations, and habits. At its core, this work delivers a devastating truth. You are not who you think you are. We believe we are consistent selves, rational, unified, continuous. Hume shatters that illusion. When you look inward, he says, you find no solid I, only a flickering stream of perceptions, moment to moment, like beads sliding on a string without a hand to hold them. The self is not an essence. It is a fiction your mind invents to make sense of the flood. Even causality, that bedrock of logic and science, does not survive Hume's gaze. We think A causes B because they follow one another, but that's habit, not proof. We expect the sun to rise tomorrow, not because we know it must, but because it always has. Beneath our proud reason lies repetition and instinct, dressed up in intellectual clothes. This book doesn't gently lead you. It drags you into the dark and forces you to look. The mind you thought was sovereign is revealed as a bundle of sensations tied together by memory and emotion. Hume doesn't destroy meaning. He strips away illusion, and in that raw emptiness, a new kind of clarity begins to rise, uncertain, fragile, but honest, and strangely, hauntingly human. Social contract theory. Social contract theory is one of the most dangerous and liberating ideas ever unleashed on civilization. At its core, it confronts the raw truth that human beings are not born into order. We are born into chaos. The laws we follow, the governments we obey, the structures we inhabit, none of them are natural. They are agreements, constructed, negotiated, and if they were created by people, they can be changed by people. This philosophy doesn't ask whether authority exists. It asks why it should. Hobbes believed that without a contract, life would be solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short, a war of all against all. Rousseau believed the opposite, that it was society that corrupted man, and that only through a just contract could freedom and equality flourish. Locke saw it as the sacred guardrail protecting natural rights, life, liberty, and property. They disagreed, but all held one terrifying belief in common. Legitimacy must be earned, not assumed. The social contract is not just a political theory. It's a mirror that reflects back the violence hidden in tradition, the submission disguised as order, the control mistaken for peace. It forces you to ask, who gave them power? Why do I obey? And what if I refuse? This idea is the seed of revolution. It whispers to the oppressed that they are not bound by the rules of their masters, that they can withdraw their consent, that they can tear down thrones, redraw boundaries, rewrite laws. It is the moment when fear gives way to fury and submission turns into sovereignty. Emile is one of the most radical and emotionally charged visions of human development ever written, a philosophy of education that isn't about textbooks or classrooms, but about unlocking the soul. Jean-Jacques Rousseau didn't write this work to reform schools. He wrote it to rescue the human spirit from corruption. At its core lies a furious belief that society breaks us long before we have a chance to be ourselves, that true growth begins not with discipline, but with freedom. Emile begins with a child, not an idealized angel, not a miniature adult, but a wild, untamed flame of potential. Rousseau insists that children are born good, but are twisted by the world's expectations, its rigid roles, its obsession with obedience and conformity. The goal of education, he argues, is not to cram the child with knowledge, but to protect their inner nature long enough for wisdom to awaken from within. We do not mold a human, we unfold one. This philosophy is unsettling because it turns our assumptions inside out. It tells parents to step back, teachers to stop controlling, and society to stop poisoning the innocence it pretends to protect. It dares to say that the worst damage comes not from ignorance, but from interference, that the heart must be educated before the mind, and that a soul forced into success becomes hollow. Emile doesn't ask how to raise a smart child. It demands we raise a free one who listens not to noise but to conscience, one who can walk into a broken world and still hear the quiet truth of his own voice. It's not just a guide to education, it's a battle cry to protect the human soul before the world forgets it ever existed. The critique of pure reason. The critique of pure reason is one of the most mind-bending, reality-altering philosophical detonations ever unleashed on human thought, a book that doesn't just challenge what you know, but how you know it. Written by Immanuel Kant, it isn't a set of answers. It's a labyrinth that traps the arrogance of certainty and forces you to watch it crumble. At its core lies a revelation so disorienting, it reshapes the very foundation of reality. The world you experience is not the world as it is, but the world as your mind constructs it. Kant doesn't whisper this, he detonates it. Every object you see, every inch of space, every second of time, these aren't passive features of the universe. They are forms your mind imposes just to make sense of experience. Space and time are not out there. They are in you. And causality? It's not found. It's assumed. The world as it appears, the phenomenal world, is a product of your mental structure. The thing in itself, reality as it truly is, forever beyond your grasp. But this isn't nihilism. It's liberation. Kant exposes the limits of pure reason, not to destroy knowledge, but to protect it. He draws a boundary around what the mind can know, so that faith, morality, and freedom can breathe in the space beyond it. He calls it a Copernican revolution in thought, not because he shifts the stars, but because he shifts you. You are no longer a passive observer. You are the architect of your own experience. This book doesn't teach you what to think. It hurls you into the raw terror of realizing that even your most basic truths, space, time, cause, are just scaffolding. And once you see that, the world never looks the same again. The Critique of Practical Reason. The Critique of Practical Reason is one of the most unyielding declarations of human freedom ever carved into philosophy. Written by Immanuel Kant, it does not ask how the world works. It demands that we understand how we must act within it. At its core lies a truth that feels almost unbearable in its weight. You are not free because you can do what you want. You are free because you can choose what is right, even when everything inside you begs to do otherwise. Kant does not speak of morality as preference or convenience or culture. He speaks of it as law, eternal, unshakable, written not in books or commandments, but in the very structure of your will. Inside you burns a compass more sacred than desire, the moral law. It commands not with threat or reward, but with a voice that says, act only according to that maxim which you can will to become universal law. This is not suggestion. It is obligation. It is the root of dignity. But what makes this work so quietly devastating is that Kant gives no excuse for failing it. Not fear, not passion, not weakness. You are free. And that freedom, that power to override impulse in the name of principle, is what makes you human. Not your emotions, not your intelligence, but your capacity to obey something higher than yourself, even when no one sees, even when everything hurts. The Critique of Practical Reason does not flatter the soul, it judges it, and in doing so, it hands you a mirror etched with fire, one that shows not what you are, but what you could be, if only you had the courage to will it. The Critique of Judgment. The Critique of Judgment is one of the most mysterious and quietly profound works in the history of philosophy. At its heart, it asks a question most of us feel but never name. Why does beauty move us? Why does a sunrise arrest the breath? Why does music summon tears? Why does a single flower seem to hold more truth than 1,000 books? Immanuel Kant does not answer with poetry. He answers with precision, and in doing so, uncovers something deeply unsettling. Beauty is not in the object. It is in us. Kant argues that judgment, true, disinterested, aesthetic judgment, is not about liking or wanting. It is about recognizing a kind of harmony that cannot be explained or possessed. When you call something beautiful, you're not describing it. You're revealing that it calls something awake inside you, something universal, yet wordless. It's a moment of resonance when your mind and nature align, and it feels as though the world makes sense, if only for a heartbeat. But beauty for Kant isn't trivial. It is a portal to freedom. In that moment of pure aesthetic judgment, you are not a consumer, a citizen, a thinker. You are simply aware, free from concepts, free from utility. It is as if the soul steps outside itself, not to escape the world, but to feel, for a brief instant, what it means to belong within it. And then there is the sublime, those moments of terror-tinged awe, when we glimpse something so vast, so powerful, it overwhelms reason. Yet Kant says we survive that moment, and in surviving, we realize the mind is greater than even what it cannot fully comprehend. Categorical imperative. The categorical imperative is one of the most exacting and soul-piercing ethical principles ever conceived, a moral law that doesn't whisper guidance, but demands obedience from the deepest part of your will. Born from the mind of Immanuel Kant, it is not concerned with consequences, feelings, or results. At its core lies a cold, crystalline truth. Act only according to that maxim, whereby you can at the same time will that it should become a universal law. This is not advice, it is command. It does not ask how you feel. It asks what would happen if everyone, everywhere, always did what you are about to do. It rips your excuses from you. It shatters the easy lies we tell ourselves to justify shortcuts, betrayals, or silent selfishness. Because if your action cannot be universalized, if it would break the world, if everyone copied you, then it is wrong. Period. The categorical imperative stares you in the face when no one else is watching, when you could lie and get away with it, when you could cheat and still win. It asks not what you want, but what kind of world you are willing to create. It doesn't offer comfort. It offers weight, dignity, duty. It says morality isn't about happiness. It's about respect for yourself and for every other rational being as an end in themselves, never a means. And once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. You feel it like iron in the spine, like a blade behind every moral choice, not to punish, but to remind you your freedom is real, but so is your responsibility. And in that space between the two, you must choose, not for reward, not out of fear, but because it is right. Phenomenology of spirit is one of the most dizzying, ecstatic, and soul-splitting philosophical journeys ever written, a descent into the chaos of consciousness that becomes somehow a blazing ascent toward absolute knowing. Hegel doesn't offer clarity. He offers transformation. This is not a book you read, it's a book you survive. At its core lies a staggering claim that truth is not a static object to be grasped, but a process, a becoming. And that becoming, it is you, your mind, your struggle, your pain. Hegel doesn't give you a map, he drops you into the storm. Consciousness begins not as wisdom, but as illusion, misunderstanding the world, itself, and everything it sees. Each step forward, sense certainty, perception, understanding, is torn apart by contradiction, and each contradiction becomes a crucible. Through negation, collapse, and crisis, the self evolves. This isn't abstract logic, it's agony in motion. It is the very shape of human growth. We suffer, we break, and through the wreckage, we rise again, closer to knowing who we are. At the heart of this painful dialectic is a terrifyingly beautiful insight. Self-consciousness is born through recognition. We need others. We define ourselves in their gaze, and yet we struggle with them for dominance, for identity, for survival. The master-slave dialectic is not just political, it is existential. In that power struggle, something divine cracks open. Phenomenology of spirit doesn't comfort or conclude. It spirals, it transforms, it explodes. It reveals that truth isn't a final answer, but the slow, violent unfolding of spirit becoming aware of itself. And once you begin this journey, There is no going back, only deeper, only further, only forward, toward the fire of total becoming. Science of logic. Science of logic is one of the most staggering acts of intellectual audacity ever unleashed on the human mind. In it, G.W.F. Hegel does not describe logic, he becomes it. He does not merely map thought, he plunges into the raw engine of reality itself, stripping away the illusion that logic is cold, static, or mechanical. At its core lies a revelation as maddening as it is sublime. Thought is not a tool we use to understand the world. Thought is the world unfolding itself through us. This is not logic as rules, it is logic as fire. Hegel takes you into the birth of being from absolute nothingness, showing how every idea gives rise to its opposite, and how the collision of these opposites creates higher, richer truths. It's not dialectic as a trick. It's the pulse of existence itself. Identity collapses into difference. Unity bursts into multiplicity. Every concept devours itself, only to be reborn as something deeper. Reading Science of Logic is like drowning in meaning. You begin with pure being, and suddenly it vanishes into nothing. But in that vanishing, you see the spark, becoming. Everything flows, everything negates, and yet everything returns. It's not chaos, it's necessity, a cosmic logic surging through history, nature, thought. Hegel doesn't explain the world, he becomes the world thinking itself, and forces you to do the same. There are no lifeboats here, no summaries, no shortcuts, only the overwhelming truth that to exist is to unfold, and to unfold is to struggle, to spiral, and to ascend. Thought is not reflection, it is reality, erupting in the mind. The will to power. The will to power is one of the most explosive and soul-scorching ideas ever unleashed into the world, a philosophy not meant to comfort the weak, but to ignite the fire buried beneath fear, shame, and surrender. At its core, it tears through every moral system, every gentle illusion, every whispered excuse and roars. Life does not obey goodness, fairness, or peace. It obeys power. Not political power, not domination over others, but the raw, relentless drive to expand, to create, to overcome, to become more. For Nietzsche, this force pulses at the heart of everything living. The plant growing towards sunlight, the child learning to walk, the artist pushing through madness to shape beauty. The will to power is not about control. It is about transformation. It is the scream that refuses to be silenced, the wound that dares to become strength, the instinct that reaches toward greatness even in the face of despair. But this philosophy doesn't flatter you. It doesn't tell you that your suffering has meaning unless you give it one. It doesn't ask you to obey. It dares you to stand alone. It says that truth isn't something you find. It's something you forge. That morality isn't sacred. It's inherited weakness unless you rise and carve your own path through the chaos. The will to power doesn't whisper. It howls. It tells you that if you are not rising, you are sinking. That your fear of judgment, your hunger for safety, your worship of comfort are the very chains that strangle your becoming. It dares you to destroy what is false and to rise, not as what the world wants, but as what only you can become. Thus spoke Zarathustra. Thus spoke Zarathustra is one of the most thunderous and soul-scorching declarations in all of philosophy, a fiery sermon not from a prophet, but from a man who dared to kill God in the hearts of men. Friedrich Nietzsche didn't write this book to teach, he wrote it to detonate. At its core is a challenge so primal, so violent in its honesty, that it burns everything false to ash. What happens when every illusion dies? Who are you when there is no longer anyone to obey but yourself? Zarathustra descends from the mountains not to preach salvation, but to unchain the human spirit. He doesn't call for comfort, he calls for transformation. God is dead, he cries, not as a mockery, but as a funeral bell tolling for every borrowed truth, every second-hand morality, every inherited fear, and in the silence that follows, something terrifying rises, the Übermensch, the overman, not a tyrant, not a savior, but a soul who creates value from within, a spirit strong enough to affirm life, even with all its chaos, suffering, and absurdity. This book is not a map. It is a mirror held too close. It shows you the smallness of your dreams, the timidity of your virtues, the lies you've told yourself just to sleep at night. It demands you burn the old gods on your tongue, renounce comfort disguised as goodness, and stand naked before your own potential. Zarathustra speaks like thunder. He blesses the fall, the wound, the solitude, because only in the breaking of the old self can a new self be born, not handed to you but forged in the fire of your own becoming. Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is one of the most dangerously elegant, morally electrifying ideas ever unleashed on human civilization, a philosophy that doesn't beg for your virtue, but demands your calculus. At its core lies a principle so disarmingly simple it shakes the foundation of ethics, the greatest happiness for the greatest number. That's it. No gods, no traditions, no sacred duties carved in stone, just consequences, just impact, just the raw, aching measure of human joy and suffering. John Stuart Mill didn't invent this idea, but he sharpened it like a blade. He took Jeremy Bentham's vision and forged it into something more human, more refined, more devastating. Utilitarianism doesn't care how noble your intentions are. It doesn't care how beautiful your beliefs sound. It asks only, what did your actions cause? Who was helped? Who was hurt? Were lives lifted or destroyed? Everything else is noise. This philosophy doesn't soothe, it convicts. It forces you to look at morality not as a matter of rules or feelings, but as a brutal arithmetic of well-being. It asks you to weigh a stranger's happiness as heavily as your own, to sacrifice comfort if it means reducing pain, to stop hiding behind excuses and choose deliberately, relentlessly for the greatest good. But this clarity comes at a cost. What if kindness to one means harm to another? What if justice must bow to numbers? Utilitarianism dares you to wrestle with these questions, not to escape them. It does not flinch. It holds your gaze, and in that fierce, unblinking moral light, you are forced to ask, what kind of world am I truly willing to build, and what am I willing to give for it? On Liberty is one of the most searing defenses of individual freedom ever written, less a political treatise than a cry of defiance against the suffocating weight of conformity. In its opening pages, John Stuart Mill doesn't merely argue for liberty, he unleashes it. He warns that tyranny does not always come wearing a crown. It often comes with a smile, with social approval, with the quiet pressure to be like everyone else. And that, he says, is far more dangerous. At its core, On Liberty declares that the freedom to think, speak, choose, and even err is not just a political right, it is a condition of human greatness. The true enemy is not only government oppression, but the tyranny of the majority, the silent violence of a culture that crushes individuality not with chains, but with judgment, ridicule, and shame. Mill insists that the progress of humanity depends not on the obedient, but on the eccentric, the lone minds who dare to dissent, to speak uncomfortable truths, to live differently. He doesn't offer freedom as comfort. He offers it as fire, the freedom to offend, the freedom to be wrong, the freedom to live a life no one else understands, and he defends it not because all opinions are equal, but because truth itself depends on their clash. Silencing even one voice, he says, robs the future of wisdom it didn't yet know it needed. On Liberty doesn't ask if society is too harsh. It asks if your soul is still your own, if you can still hear your thoughts beneath the noise, if you are truly free, not because you are allowed to live, but because you have the courage to live as yourself, no matter the cost. Das Kapital is one of the most unflinching and incendiary critiques of modern civilization ever written, a philosophy that rips the mask off industry, wealth, and progress to expose something raw, brutal, and suffocating beneath. At its core, it doesn't just ask what capitalism is, it asks what it does to us, how it twists time, value, labor, and even human relationships into commodities to be bought, sold, exploited, and discarded. Marx doesn't begin with rage. He begins with analysis, cold, methodical, precise. He traces how value isn't found in money, but in labor, your hours, your breath, your strength. Yet in the factory, in the office, on the assembly line, that labor is stolen. Your effort becomes profit for someone else. Your body becomes a tool, your mind becomes a mechanism, and your soul is buried under the gears of production. And the more efficiently you work, the more alienated you become from the very thing you create. This isn't just economic theory, it's spiritual dissection. Marx forces you to see how capitalism devours not only time, but meaning, how even leisure is infected with fatigue, how desire is manufactured, how identity is packaged. You're not living, you're surviving, performing, consuming, selling yourself, one exhausted piece at a time. But the deepest wound comes from the realization that this system doesn't break because it fails. It endures because it works. It extracts, it exploits, it thrives on inequality like a machine that runs on blood. And if you don't see it, you are it. You're inside the dream, thinking you're awake. Das Kapital is not just a book. It is a mirror that refuses to lie. And when you finally see your reflection, it dares you to ask, who profits from your silence? The Communist Manifesto. The Communist Manifesto is one of the most incendiary and emotionally electrifying documents ever written. Not a theory whispered in ivory towers, but a battle cry hurled into the face of history. At its core is a fury that has burned for centuries, that the world is divided, not by merit or virtue, but by power, by those who own and those who toil. Marx and Engels do not ask for sympathy. They demand reckoning. The history of all hitherto existing society, they declare, is the history of class struggles. This is not just economics, it is a dissection of suffering. The manifesto rips off the mask of capitalism and shows the raw wound beneath, a system where profit grows from exploitation, where workers are reduced to numbers, where families, traditions, and human dignity are devoured in the endless hunger for growth. It exposes the seduction of freedom when only a few can afford to choose, and the cruelty of progress when it leaves millions crushed in its wake. But its most dangerous power lies not in its critique, but in its hope. The manifesto doesn't mourn, it prophesies. It envisions a world where the workers rise, not with hatred, but with clarity, where they seize the means of production, dissolve the class system, and birth a society built not on competition, but on shared power. It believes ferociously that the chains you wear are not your destiny, that solidarity can shatter them. This document isn't history, it's pressure. It's the voice in every injustice that says, this is not inevitable. And once you hear it, the silence of obedience becomes unbearable. The world as will and representation. The world as will and representation is one of the most shattering, soul-stripping, philosophical revelations ever penned, a work that doesn't just challenge the meaning of life, but tears it apart with terrifying beauty. Arthur Schopenhauer's masterpiece doesn't flatter you, it doesn't inspire, it exposes. At its core is a haunting claim. The world you see, touch, and know is not reality. It is a representation, a mirage shaped by your mind. But behind that illusion, there is something darker, deeper, more primal, the will. This will is not reason, not God, not purpose. It is blind, endless, hungering, a ceaseless force that drives all things to strive, to desire, to reach, and suffer. Every cry for love, every ambition, every pulse of craving is the will erupting through you, and it never stops. It doesn't care if you're fulfilled, it just wants. To exist is to ache. To be human is to be a vessel of restless yearning, forever chasing what disappears the moment it's touched. Schopenhauer rips away the illusion of meaning and exposes life as a cycle of longing and disillusionment. Pleasure is not fulfillment. It is the brief silence of pain. And yet, in this bleakness, he finds a strange kind of grace. Through art, through music, through compassion and ascetic surrender, we can momentarily escape the will's grip, step outside the storm, and see the truth, even if only for a moment. This philosophy does not comfort, it wounds, but in its wound, it offers clarity. It asks, not that you be happy, but that you be awake, that you see the world not as you wish it to be, but as it is, beautiful, tragic, and endlessly burning with the fire of desire. The varieties of religious experience. The varieties of religious experience is one of the most haunting and intimate explorations of the human spirit ever captured, a work that doesn't preach religion, but dives into its rawest, most trembling form, the experience of the divine. William James doesn't care what church you belong to, what dogma you follow, or whether you believe at all. What he cares about, what he lays bare, is what happens when a soul comes undone before something larger than itself. At its core, this work is not about religion as structure. It is about the moments that crack the shell of the self, the sudden stillness, the flood of tears, the quiet knowing that everything somehow makes sense. James takes you inside the minds of mystics, visionaries, the broken and the ecstatic, not to judge them, but to show you that religion is not born in doctrine. It is born in crisis, in surrender, in awe. But what makes this philosophy so emotionally devastating is its honesty. James does not romanticize. He shows the terror as much as the peace, the darkness as much as the light. Some religious experiences are beautiful, others are shattering, and yet in both, he finds a truth deeper than reason, a part of the psyche that does not speak in logic, but in fire. The varieties of religious experience doesn't tell you what to believe. It tells you that belief begins where language ends, that sometimes the soul feels before the mind can understand. And in that moment, when the ego dissolves and the sacred breaks through, you are not taught, you are transformed. Pragmatism. Pragmatism is one of the most quietly subversive philosophies ever spoken aloud, a way of thinking that doesn't ask, is it true, but cuts deeper and demands, does it work? Born from the restless, wounded heart of American experience, pragmatism, crafted by William James and forged in the fires of uncertainty, refuses the comfort of abstract truth and instead reaches for something far more dangerous, truth that lives, breathes, and bleeds in the real world. At its core, pragmatism is a rebellion against the frozen certainty of rigid systems. It doesn't worship logic for its own sake. It asks whether an idea heals or harms, liberates or oppresses, grows or decays. If a belief carries you forward, if it solves your pain, if it brings clarity to your confusion, it matters. If not, no matter how elegant, it's a ghost. It's dead weight in the soul's pocket. But this isn't relativism, it's responsibility. Pragmatism forces you to own your truth, not as a passive acceptance, but as a lived choice. You can no longer hide behind what is objectively right. You must ask, moment by moment, what brings light into the world? What makes you better? What helps you bear the unbearable? Pragmatism is unsettling because it refuses the static. It says your truth must earn its keep. Your philosophy must show up in your actions. Your beliefs must leave footprints, or they don't exist. And in a world starving for certainty, this idea doesn't offer a throne. It offers a path, one paved with effort, change, risk, and the relentless courage to become someone whose ideas are not just spoken, but lived. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus is one of the most austere and mind-bending works of philosophy ever conceived, a book so cold, so precise, so stripped of sentiment that it feels less like reading than stepping into a cathedral of pure thought. Written by Ludwig Wittgenstein in the trenches of World War I, it doesn't comfort, it doesn't plead. It constructs a ladder made of logic and dares you to climb. At its core is a singular belief: the limits of your language are the limits of your world. This is not metaphor. This is annihilation. Wittgenstein shatters the illusion that language is a neutral tool. He insists that we can only meaningfully speak about what can be clearly expressed, and everything else, every moral conviction, every mystical intuition, every ache of the soul, must be passed over in silence. Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. It's not a rejection of meaning, it's a funeral for false clarity. The Tractatus isn't written in chapters, it's carved into numbered propositions, each sentence like a block of ice, measured, exact, unyielding. It strips reality down to its logical scaffolding, demolishing confusion with ruthless discipline. And then, once the scaffolding is complete, Wittgenstein leaves it behind. He tells you the ladder he built must be thrown away once you have climbed it, because what matters most can't be spoken. It can only be lived. This book doesn't just question what we know. It breaks the illusion that we ever knew anything clearly. It leaves you standing at the edge of language itself, staring into a silence more honest than most words will ever be. Being and Time is one of the most disorienting, soul-drilling works in all of philosophy. A book that doesn't explain life, but drags you to its raw edge and dares you to face it. Martin Heidegger doesn't write to soothe or solve. He writes to unravel. At its core, Being and Time is a seismic confrontation with the most ignored and terrifying question of all: what does it mean to be? Heidegger doesn't begin with systems or logic. He begins with you, with Dasein, the human being as the one who must confront its own existence. You are not a thing in the world. You are the one who experiences the world, who interprets it, who carries the unbearable knowledge that you are moving toward death with every breath. Time isn't just a measurement. It is the very structure of your being. You are not a being who has time. You are time, and that's where the fracture begins. Most people live in inauthenticity, lost in distraction, roles, routines, borrowed meanings. Heidegger doesn't judge that. He exposes it. But once you catch a glimpse of your own mortality, once you truly feel that your time is finite, you awaken. You begin to live authentically, not by following rules, but by choosing who you are in the face of nothingness. Being and Time doesn't offer comfort. It strips you bare. It makes you stare into the abyss of your own temporality and ask, are you living as if this is yours, your only life, your only chance to be? And once that question is asked, you cannot unhear it. You are no longer asleep. You are thrown into the world, and now it's yours to face. Logical positivism. Logical positivism is one of the most ruthless, unsparing philosophies ever forged, a scalpel to the throat of metaphysics, religion, and speculation. At its core lies a brutal demand. If a statement cannot be empirically verified or logically proven, it is meaningless, not false, not debatable, meaningless. The grand questions that once moved civilizations, what is God, what is the soul, why are we here, are, under this philosophy, not profound mysteries. They are empty noise. Born in the 20th century's aftermath of war, disillusionment, and scientific triumph, logical positivism came not to inspire, but to cleanse. Led by the Vienna Circle and thinkers like A.J. Ayer, it sought to build a world of pure clarity, where language was not poetry, but precision, where every sentence was tested like a hypothesis, and only what could be observed, measured, or logically deduced would stand. It doesn't offer warmth. It offers discipline. It forces the mind to strip away its illusions and stand naked before reality. No comfort, no metaphysical dreams, just the cool steel of reason. And while it sounds inhuman, almost robotic, its emotional weight is staggering because it asks you to kill your most cherished questions unless you can prove they breathe. But in that silence, after the old myths are burned, something terrifyingly honest remains, a mind that no longer hides behind fog, a world reduced to what can be known. Logical positivism doesn't pretend to fill the void. It just dares you to look into it and speak only what can stand against doubt. Everything else, it says, is just pretending. Ordinary language philosophy. Ordinary language philosophy is one of the most quietly devastating revolutions in modern thought, a philosophy that doesn't shout from the heights of abstraction, but crouches low in the words we use every day and whispers, "You've been fooled." At its core, it challenges the grand systems of metaphysics and logic, not by refuting them, but by asking, "What are you even saying?" It doesn't tear ideas down with violence. It dismantles them with clarity. This philosophy, shaped by thinkers like Ludwig Wittgenstein and J.L. Austin, begins with a disarming insight. Many of our deepest confusions come not from ignorance, but from language misused, words stretched too far, questions that look profound but are empty. We get lost in labyrinths of our own making, philosophical puzzles that dissolve the moment we pay attention to how language actually works in real life. Ordinary language philosophy tells you to look closely, not at what words could mean, but at what they do mean when real people use them. What do we mean by no? What counts as pain? What does it actually mean to mean something? These questions seem small, but they cut deeper than metaphysical arguments ever could, because they reveal that most of our confusion isn't in the world, it's in our habits of speaking. This is a philosophy of humility. It doesn't seek to build cathedrals of thought. It clears the rubble. It says the truth isn't buried in theory. It's hiding in plain sight, in jokes, in slips, in silence, in the words we toss away without thought. And once you see it, you begin to realize the world didn't need to be redefined. It needed to be understood as it already is. The open society and its enemies. The open society and its enemies is one of the fiercest, most relentless defenses of human freedom ever written. A work born not from academic comfort, but from the smoke and blood of collapsing civilizations. Penned by Karl Popper as fascism and totalitarianism swept across Europe, it is not a book of quiet theory. It is a warning, a battle cry, and a line drawn in fire. At its core is a terrifying question. Why do we keep trading freedom for certainty? Popper tears into the seductive illusions of the closed society, those rigid systems where rulers claim absolute truth, where dissent is betrayal, where history is destiny, and where the individual vanishes beneath the weight of the collective. He traces this authoritarian hunger not just to modern tyrants, but to revered thinkers, Plato, Hegel, Marx, those who claim to know the fate of history, and in doing so, strip people of the right to shape their own. The open society, Popper insists, is fragile. It demands courage. It demands that we embrace the unknown, tolerate disagreement, and build progress not through grand design, but through painful trial and error. It is not utopia. It is unfinished, and that is its glory. What makes this philosophy so devastating is how familiar its enemies feel, the echo chambers, the cults of personality, the blind longing for order. Popper forces you to see how freedom dies, not in sudden revolutions, but in quiet abandonments, in the moment you stop asking questions, in the moment you stop allowing others to. The open society doesn't promise safety, it demands responsibility. And if you're not defending it, you may already be letting it die. Language, truth, and logic. Language, truth, and logic is one of the most explosive acts of intellectual demolition in 20th century philosophy, a ruthless, surgical strike against metaphysics, mysticism, and all that hides behind the illusion of deep, wordy wisdom, written by a young A.J. Ayer with the precision of a scalpel and the swagger of a bomb. This book doesn't whisper theory, it lays down a challenge. If your statement cannot be tested by experience or verified by logic, it is meaningless. At its core lies the heart of logical positivism, that philosophy should not be poetry or theology or vague introspection. It should be science in sentence form. No more debates about the soul, the universe's purpose, or God's intentions. If it cannot be proven or disproven, it is not profound. It is nonsense dressed in intellectual robes. Ayer's voice is electric with contempt for philosophical fog. He strips language of its mystical glamour and demands clarity, precision, testability. Ethics, not truth but emotion. Metaphysics, not insight but illusion. He doesn't kill wonder, he quarantines it. And what's left is a brutal clarity. Philosophy is not here to comfort you. It is here to cut away what cannot be known. But beneath the cold edge of verification lies a deeper provocation. How much of what we believe, what we feel certain about, what we defend with passion is actually empty noise? Language, truth, and logic doesn't answer life's big questions. It annihilates the ones it deems unworthy. And in that silence, it dares you to begin again, with nothing but reason, evidence, and the courage to call even your deepest convictions into question. Being and nothingness. Being and nothingness is one of the most harrowing and soul-stripping works ever unleashed on the human condition. A philosophy that doesn't explain life, but exposes it. At its core, Jean-Paul Sartre does not offer comfort. He offers confrontation. You are not a fixed self. You are not defined by your past, your job, your roles, or your trauma. You are freedom, raw, terrifying, relentless freedom. And that, he says, is both your burden and your curse. In Sartre's world, there is no essence before existence. You are not born with meaning. You create it, moment by agonizing moment. And the minute you try to escape that freedom, by blaming circumstance, by surrendering to labels, by pretending someone else is responsible, you are living in what he calls bad faith, a lie, a self-deception, an evasion of the unbearable truth. You are what you choose. But the most devastating insight of being and nothingness is that there is nothing beneath your freedom, no God to define you, no soul to rescue you, no ultimate blueprint for what you should become, just a blank canvas and the pressure to paint something honest before time runs out. And yet, this void is not despair, it is fire. Sartre doesn't tell you how to live. He shoves you into the abyss and demands, create. There is no meaning waiting for you, but there is meaning you can make. Every action, every decision is a declaration of what kind of existence you dare to craft in the face of nothing. The question is not whether life has purpose. The question is whether you will be brave enough to give it one. The ethics of ambiguity. The ethics of ambiguity is one of the most raw, defiant, and soul-stripping moral philosophies ever written. A cry not for perfection, but for honesty. In this relentless, unflinching work, Simone de Beauvoir exposes the terrifying space between freedom and despair and dares you to live there with your eyes open. At its core, it tells you the truth you've always sensed but never dared to name. There are no absolute maps, no fixed foundations, only you, the world, and the weight of your choices. De Beauvoir doesn't offer comfort. She offers fire. She begins by pulling away the false gods. Objective moralities, universal truths, fixed identities. You are not born with meaning, you must create it. But creation is not purity, it is ambiguity. It is the struggle of becoming, of living fully while knowing that failure, contradiction, and complicity are always part of the price. Freedom is not the absence of limits, it is the act of choosing in spite of them. What makes this philosophy so emotionally devastating is its refusal to let you hide. You are free, but so is everyone else. And the moment you ignore their freedom, the moment you treat others as objects in your story, you betray your own humanity. Ethics, for Beauvoir, is not about obeying rules. It is about recognizing the sacredness of the other's freedom and acting in a world where nothing guarantees you'll do it right. To live ethically is to live in tension, to create meaning in a world that offers none, to fight not because you will win, but because not fighting would mean you never lived at all. The ethics of ambiguity is not a guidebook. It is a dare. The second sex. The second sex is one of the most shattering and defiant confrontations with identity ever written, a philosophical blade forged in the fire of lived experience. Simone de Beauvoir does not begin with abstract logic. She begins with a wound. Woman has always been the other, not the subject, not the center, but the deviation, the exception, the shadow cast by man's spotlight. And from that starting point, she unleashes a revolution, not just of feminism, but of human consciousness. At its core, the second sex is not a cry for equality. It is an existential scream for liberation. De Beauvoir does not beg for space at the table. She flips the table over and forces us to ask why it was built to begin with. She shows how femininity has been sculpted by culture, mythology, religion, philosophy, layer upon layer of expectation, until the woman herself is buried beneath what she was told to be. She rips through biology, psychoanalysis, history, and literature to expose a quiet horror that women have been taught to become complicit in their own limitation, that submission is not natural, it is learned, that woman is not a destiny, it's a role assigned, rehearsed, and enforced through generations, and yet, within that realization, she lights a flame of unbearable hope that freedom is possible, but it must be chosen. What makes this work so haunting is its refusal to simplify. It doesn't offer easy answers. It demands that women and men confront how they've been made and dares them to remake themselves, not into mirrors of each other, but into subjects of their own becoming. It is not just a book, it is a reckoning, and once it touches you, you do not walk away unchanged. You rise. The authoritarian personality. The authoritarian personality is one of the most disturbing, spine-pricking psychological x-rays ever taken of the human soul, a work that doesn't just analyze prejudice, but exposes the machinery of conformity, submission, and cruelty lurking beneath the surface of ordinary lives. Written by Theodore W. Adorno and a team of social scientists in the aftermath of World War II, it isn't just a study of fascism, it's a warning that the seeds of authoritarianism are not rare, they're buried in the everyday. At its core lies a chilling idea that certain personalities are structured to obey, to fear freedom, to need hierarchy, even if they scream the language of order and morality. These individuals don't just tolerate authority, they crave it. They find security in absolutes, comfort in in-groups, and fury toward anything that challenges tradition, purity, or control. They don't become authoritarian by accident. They're shaped into it by rigid parenting, cultural shame, and the suffocating pressure to suppress emotion and difference. Adorno doesn't flinch. He breaks down the authoritarian mind with brutal clarity. Its obsession with power, its hostility to the unfamiliar, its use of morality as a weapon to punish. And what's most terrifying is not the tyrant, but the neighbor, the friend, the teacher, the follower, who smiles while upholding the very systems that crush others. This philosophy doesn't live in theory, it lives in institutions, families, media, laws. The authoritarian personality is not just a study, it's a mirror. It asks, quietly and relentlessly, how much of your obedience is love of order, and how much is fear of yourself. Dialectic of enlightenment. Dialectic of Enlightenment is one of the most unsettling and disillusioning works ever penned, a philosophy that pulls the rug out from beneath modernity and says, what if the very light that was meant to save us is what's destroying us? Written by Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer, in the ashes of war and genocide, it is not a rejection of reason, it is a scream at what reason has become. At its core lies a brutal claim: the Enlightenment, which promised freedom, has mutated into a new kind of domination, cold, efficient, and invisible. This philosophy doesn't simply criticize religion, tradition, or ignorance. It turns on progress itself. It asks why, in an age of science, we are still chained, why in a world of knowledge we still suffer. And its answer is devastating, because reason, stripped of reflection and empathy, becomes control. Technology becomes surveillance. Rationality becomes bureaucracy. Culture becomes industry. Even our pleasures, our art, our entertainment, are engineered to pacify, not awaken. We are no longer thinking. We are consuming. What makes Dialectic of Enlightenment so emotionally wrenching is not just its rage, but its mourning. It grieves the loss of wonder. It grieves a world where myth was replaced by data, only to find that the new gods are colder than the old. It grieves how humanity traded mystery for mastery, and in doing so, became more enslaved than ever. This work is not a rejection of enlightenment. It is a warning that without self-critique, without soul, even light can blind. And in that blindness, we forget not only how to see, but how to feel. One-dimensional man. One-dimensional man is one of the most haunting and claustrophobic critiques of modern life ever written, a work that doesn't scream about tyranny, but quietly reveals how freedom dies in plain sight. Herbert Marcuse doesn't warn of a boot stomping the human spirit. He shows you something worse, a world where people no longer notice they are unfree, a world where revolt is pacified, not by violence, but by comfort, by gadgets, consumption, and entertainment that lull the mind to sleep. At its core, this philosophy delivers a chilling insight. Advanced industrial society doesn't just control our bodies, it colonizes our desires, shapes our thoughts, and flattens our inner lives. It creates humans who can work, buy, scroll, and smile, but not think beyond what is given, not question, not dream, and in this sterilized landscape, true opposition becomes impossible because even the language of rebellion is absorbed, packaged, and sold back to us as fashion. Marcuse doesn't describe a dystopia of fear. He shows a prison made of satisfaction, a place where political discourse is reduced to slogans, where art becomes advertisement, where individuality is replaced by functionality. We become one-dimensional, capable of functioning, but no longer of imagining anything different. What makes this philosophy so quietly brutal is that it holds up a mirror, not to dictators, but to ourselves, to our routines, our comforts, our silence. It asks, have you traded your freedom for convenience? Have you accepted the world not because it is just, but because it is easy? One-dimensional man doesn't demand a revolution of weapons. It demands something far harder, a revolution of awareness, and it dares you to wake up. The phenomenology of perception. The phenomenology of perception is one of the most quietly radical and emotionally disorienting philosophical awakenings ever penned, a revelation that doesn't live in the abstract, but in your skin, your eyes, your breath. Maurice Merleau-Ponty doesn't begin with logic or language. He begins with the body, and not the body as object, but as experience, as the trembling intersection between self and world. At its core lies a seismic truth. You do not have a body. You are your body. This is not metaphor. It is a dismantling. Merleau-Ponty rips apart the illusion that consciousness floats above the world, detached, clinical, in control. He shows that perception is not something you do, it's something you are. That seeing, touching, hearing, moving, These are not passive inputs or mechanical functions. They are the very ground of being. The world is not out there. It arises in your encounter with it. He takes the simplest acts, a hand grasping a cup, a face turning towards sunlight, and reveals the mystery we've forgotten, that nothing, absolutely nothing, is separate from the body's knowing. You don't think the world first. You feel it, and only then do the thoughts come tumbling after. But the deepest rupture in this work is existential. If you are your body, then you are vulnerability, you are history, you are desire, you are entangled, you are never fully transparent to yourself and never fully sealed from the world. The phenomenology of perception doesn't hand you answers. It places you in a world that pulses with ambiguity, and in that ambiguity, it whispers a terrifying, liberating truth. This is what it means to be alive, the human condition. The human condition is one of the most piercingly, lucid, and quietly devastating meditations on existence ever written, a work that doesn't offer salvation, but lays bare the truth of what it means to live, to labor, to act in a world that is always watching and always forgetting. Hannah Arendt doesn't write with sentiment. She writes with surgical light. At its core, this book isn't about answers. It's about remembering what we've forgotten, that to be human is not just to survive, but to appear, to show up in the world with words and deeds that matter. Arendt unravels the texture of life into three haunting strands: labor, work, and action. Labor is the endless biological rhythm of survival, the body eating, sleeping, repeating. Work is the world we build, artifacts, institutions, permanence. But action is sacred. It is the miracle of beginning, of stepping into the world with something unrehearsed, unpredictable, and free. It is speech that risks exposure, deeds that cannot be undone. It is how we reveal who we are, not what we are. And yet, in the modern age, this sacred dimension of life is collapsing. We've blurred work and labor into a fog of productivity. We've replaced action with administration, originality with repetition, freedom with function. Arendt doesn't cry this loss. She names it, cold and clear. The human condition isn't tragic because we die. It's tragic because we forget to appear before we do, because we drown our freedom in routine and call it life. This book doesn't shout, it watches. It asks whether you are truly living or just enduring, constructing, obeying, while the deepest part of you waits, silently, for permission to begin. The origins of totalitarianism. The origins of totalitarianism is one of the most chilling, unflinching analyses of political evil ever written, a philosophy not born from theory, but from witnessing humanity collapse into horror. Hannah Arendt doesn't speak from a distance. She writes with the urgency of someone who lived through the storm, saw what it did, and refused to look away. At its core is a harrowing truth. Totalitarianism does not arrive suddenly. It creeps in through the cracks, when truth dissolves, when people stop thinking, and when loneliness becomes the soil for mass control. Arendt does not describe tyrants. She dissects systems. She shows how modern totalitarian regimes like Nazism and Stalinism didn't just use violence. They used ideology like a weapon. They didn't just demand obedience, they destroyed reality. Language was twisted. History was rewritten. Facts became fluid. The goal was not to convince, but to exhaust the mind, to make people doubt everything until they could no longer tell the difference between loyalty and survival. But what makes this philosophy so emotionally devastating is how close it cuts to the present. Arendt exposes how isolation, alienation, and political apathy become tinder for authoritarian flames. She shows how when truth becomes irrelevant, when individuality is eroded, when fear replaces thought, the unthinkable becomes possible, not because people are evil, but because they are numb. The origins of totalitarianism does not scream, it diagnoses, and in its quiet precision, is a warning more terrifying than any alarm, that the loss of freedom does not begin with violence. It begins with forgetting how to think, how to care, and how to stand alone in the face of madness. The structure of scientific revolutions. The structure of scientific revolutions is one of the most disorienting and paradigm-breaking philosophies of knowledge ever unveiled. A theory that doesn't just challenge how science grows, but dares to say it doesn't grow the way we think it does. At its core, Thomas Kuhn tears apart the comforting myth of steady progress, revealing that science is not a calm, cumulative march toward truth, but a series of violent upheavals, earthquakes of the mind called paradigm shifts. Kuhn shatters the illusion that science is objective, linear, or immune to human flaws. He shows that scientists, like all people, live inside shared worldviews, paradigms that shape what they see, how they ask questions, and even what counts as real. And when enough anomalies build up, data that doesn't fit, results that don't align, the old paradigm doesn't adapt. It collapses, not with grace, but with resistance, denial, and often outrage. This is not a book about formulas. It's a study of blindness. It shows how entire generations can live under a system of thought so total that they don't even know they're inside it, until one day someone sees differently, not slightly, but radically. They don't add new answers. They change the questions, they flip the lens, and everything looks different. What makes Kuhn's vision so destabilizing is that it doesn't just apply to science, it applies to you, your beliefs, your certainties, your truths. What if your worldview isn't truth, but a paradigm waiting to break? What if the next revolution isn't in the lab, but in your mind, waiting to erupt? The archaeology of knowledge. The archaeology of knowledge is one of the most disorienting and mind-scraping works of philosophy ever unleashed, a book that doesn't just challenge what you know, but how you think you know it. Michel Foucault doesn't come with answers, he comes with dynamite. At its core, this philosophy detonates the comforting myth that history is a smooth, linear story of progress. Instead, it reveals a buried terrain of ruptures, silences, and fractures, where truth is not discovered, but constructed, layer by layer, like sediment over time. Foucault doesn't ask what knowledge is, he asks what rules made certain statements possible, who had the power to speak them, what other voices were erased, excluded, left unnamed beneath the polished surface of accepted history. He treats ideas not as sacred relics, but as archaeological ruins, artifacts shaped by discourse, by institutions, by the invisible systems that determine which thoughts get to exist and which are forgotten before they ever take form. This is not about ideology, it's about structure. Foucault forces you to see that even the most objective knowledge, science, medicine, even language itself, is shaped by power, that beneath what we call reason lies a battlefield of forgotten battles, of ghosts whose only sin was speaking out of turn. And once you see this, truly see it, you can't unsee it. Every textbook feels curated, every archive feels incomplete, every truth feels like a product of something deeper, more hidden. The archaeology of knowledge is not a theory, it's a lens, and once it touches your eyes, the world looks less like a story and more like a crime scene waiting to be unearthed. Discipline and punish. Discipline and punish is one of the most chilling, skin-pricking revelations ever written about the hidden architecture of power, a work that doesn't just describe punishment, but exposes how your body, your behavior, even your thoughts have been molded by systems you didn't choose. Michel Foucault doesn't tell you what oppression looks like. He shows you the ghost behind your posture, your silence, your gaze. And at its core lies a terrifying truth. Modern society doesn't rule through violence, it rules through visibility. Foucault begins with blood, the savage spectacle of public execution, but then the horror shifts. Punishment becomes invisible, quiet, rational. The prison replaces the scaffold. The scream becomes the silence of the cell. But this isn't mercy, it's evolution. Power no longer crushes bodies, it shapes them. It watches, it records, it categorizes, it normalizes. And in that surveillance, we learn to discipline ourselves. The genius of this philosophy is how deeply it implicates you. The classroom, the hospital, the office, the factory, all of them become sites of control, spaces where you are measured, examined, compared. The panopticon, Foucault's symbol of modern power, is a prison where one central watchtower sees all, yet is never seen. And so, prisoners behave as if they're being watched, even when they're not. You are not forced, you are trained. Discipline and punish doesn't accuse the system. It reveals how the system has already taken root inside you. And once you see it, once you feel the invisible gaze, you cannot unsee it. You realize you've been shaped not by chains, but by expectations, habits, and the constant fear of not measuring up. The punishment now is being watched. Madness and civilization. Madness and civilization is one of the most haunting, hypnotic assaults ever launched on the history of reason, a philosophy that doesn't just ask what is madness, but asks who gets to decide. In Michel Foucault's gripping excavation of Western thought, madness is not a medical condition. It is a mirror, a reflection of the fears, values, and silent violence embedded in civilization itself. And behind every asylum, every diagnosis, every clinical word, he hears a scream the world has tried to silence for centuries. At its core lies a devastating revelation. Madness was not always locked away. Once the mad were wanderers, jesters, even seen as possessed by a strange kind of wisdom. But something changed. The age of reason arrived, and with it, a deep terror of everything that could not be explained. Madness, once part of the human spectrum, became the other, something to be caged, corrected, erased. The asylum was not a sanctuary. It was a machine for conformity. Foucault doesn't write to comfort. He writes to rupture. He pulls apart the polished surfaces of psychiatry, morality, and social order, revealing how control is hidden in compassion and how fear wears the mask of science. Madness, he shows, is not the absence of reason. It is what reason refuses to see. It is the truth buried beneath categories, the human voice drowned out by white walls and expert tongues. Madness and civilization doesn't demand you defend madness. It demands you listen to it, because in that discarded voice, wild, wounded, and unclean, you may hear not insanity, but the echo of your own suppressed self. The order of things. The order of things is one of the most haunting and destabilizing philosophical excavations ever written. A cold, elegant dismantling of everything we believe about knowledge, truth, and ourselves. Michel Foucault doesn't scream, he dissects. With surgical precision, he traces how the very structure of thought has shifted through history, silently and totally, as if the ground beneath our minds had been moved without warning. At its core lies an unbearable revelation. Man is not the center of knowledge. He is its invention. Foucault leads you through the buried architectures of human understanding, not just what we think, but how thought itself is framed. He shows that what counts as truth in one era becomes nonsense in the next, that what we call reason, science, or self is not eternal, but historical. Epistemes, hidden frameworks of knowledge, rise and fall like tides, shaping entire civilizations, then vanishing without a trace. And within this shifting order, he finds a ghost, the modern figure of man, not as a soul, not as a divine image, but as an idea constructed in the 19th century, placed at the center of meaning and already crumbling. Foucault whispers a terrifying possibility, that the human being, as we understand it, is an illusion. Man is an invention of recent date, he writes, and one perhaps nearing its end. This isn't relativism. It's deeper. It's the realization that what you think is timeless, your truths, your selfhood, your vision of reality, may be nothing more than the product of a particular moment, a particular discourse, a particular silence, and when that silence breaks, you may disappear with it. A theory of justice. A theory of justice is one of the most sweeping and morally electrifying visions of fairness ever imagined, a philosophy that dares to redesign society from the ground up, not by force or ideology, but by asking a single piercing question: what would justice look like if none of us knew who we'd be? John Rawls doesn't begin with history or power. He begins with a veil of ignorance. Behind that veil, you know nothing about yourself, your class, race, talents, health, religion, gender. You don't know if you'll be born rich or poor, strong or vulnerable, cherished or discarded. And in that blindfolded state, Rawls asks you to design the rules of society, not for your advantage, but for fairness. Because when privilege is invisible, compassion becomes rational. Justice becomes self-interest at its most enlightened. This isn't a dream, it's a blueprint. Rawls builds a system based on two radical principles: that everyone deserves the most freedom possible until it interferes with someone else's, and that inequality is only just if it benefits the least advantaged. He doesn't argue for perfect equality. He argues for moral legitimacy, for a society where your fate isn't determined by the lottery of birth, and where institutions serve people, not the other way around. But what makes a theory of justice so soul-rattling isn't just its logic, it's its moral demand. It forces you to admit how much of your life rests on chance. It holds up a mirror and asks, if you had to start over, blind, would you still defend the world you live in now? And if not, what are you doing about it? Anarchy, state, and utopia. Anarchy, state, and utopia is one of the most defiant, provocative, and liberating declarations ever made against the machinery of forced equality. A philosophical firestorm that doesn't just challenge the modern state, but dares to ask whether it has any moral right to exist at all. Written by Robert Nozick, it is not a quiet treatise, it's a rebellion, and at its core lies a radically simple, dangerously powerful idea that individuals are not tools for social dreams, they are ends in themselves. Nozick begins by drawing a line in the sand, from absolute anarchy to minimal state and no further. He doesn't reject society, but he rejects the idea that society owns you, that your talents, your time, your life can be taken in the name of justice. To him, redistributive taxation isn't just a policy, it's a moral theft. You didn't consent to be used for someone else's vision of fairness. You are not a resource, you are a sovereign. What makes this philosophy so unsettling is its clarity. Nozick doesn't argue for selfishness, he argues for dignity. If you build something, it is yours. If you give, it must be voluntary. If someone takes, even for noble reasons, they've crossed a sacred line. His famous Wilt Chamberlain example drives the point home. Even the most just distribution becomes unjust the moment free people start making unequal choices. Anarchy, state, and utopia doesn't apologize for freedom, it unleashes it. It pulls apart the moral scaffolding of the welfare state and forces you to see the price of utopia. And then it asks, with terrifying honesty, are you willing to sacrifice your liberty for someone else's dream, or does your life belong to you? The Self and Its Brain. The Self and Its Brain is one of the most electrifying and existentially charged philosophical works ever composed, a bold collision between neuroscience and metaphysics that dares to ask the most terrifying question of all: what if your consciousness is not just a product of your brain? In this sprawling dialogue between Karl Popper and Sir John Eccles, science meets soul, and the result is nothing short of war. At its core lies a defiant resistance to reduction. Against the cold certainty of materialism, the belief that we are nothing more than neurons firing in gray matter, this work proposes something radical, that the mind is not just the brain, that the self is not just a trick of biology, but a real autonomous force that interacts with, but is not imprisoned by, the physical. It is not a rejection of science. It is a demand that science not amputate what it cannot yet explain. This philosophy cuts deep because it tears at something we've been conditioned to accept, that free will is an illusion, that consciousness is an epiphenomenon, that your choices are just chemical outcomes masquerading as agency. But Popper and Eccles rebel. They argue for a layered reality, where the brain is a biological structure, yes, but the self is something more, a participant in shaping reality, not a passenger. The self and its brain doesn't hand you easy answers. It shakes your certainty. It leaves you staring into the mirror, wondering whether the voice inside you is just noise or something irreducibly real, something that can't be found under a microscope, but without which nothing else would matter. The concept of law. The concept of law is one of the most unnerving and clarifying explorations of authority ever written, a work that strips the law of its robes and forces you to see it not as a monument to justice, but as a fragile, evolving system of human agreement. H.L.A. Hart doesn't argue with outrage. He builds with precision, and at its core lies a quiet but devastating question. What makes law legitimate, if not fear or force? Hart begins by exposing a tension we all live with but rarely name. The law demands obedience, but where does its authority come from? Not from violence. Any thug with a gun can issue commands. Not from morality. Plenty of immoral laws have been enforced. Instead, Hart locates law in a strange and delicate construction, a union of primary and secondary rules, rules that tell us what we must do, and rules that tell us how rules are made, changed, or recognized. But what makes this philosophy so piercing is how it reveals the law as an invisible agreement, a shared belief, a kind of collective faith. Once people stop treating rules as binding, the system itself begins to crack. The moment we stop believing in the rule of recognition, the unspoken heartbeat of a legal system, everything that rests on it starts to decay. The concept of law doesn't rage against injustice. It exposes the scaffolding that holds law together and dares you to see how fragile it is. It tells you that legitimacy isn't about power, it's about trust. And when that trust erodes, even the most carefully written laws become ghosts, empty, dead on the page until someone believes again. The logic of scientific discovery. The logic of scientific discovery is one of the most jarring and intellectually explosive reimaginings of science ever written, a work that doesn't gently question how we build knowledge, but ruthlessly exposes the fault lines beneath everything we thought was certain. Karl Popper doesn't begin with admiration for science. He begins with suspicion, and at its core lies a radical assertion. Science doesn't prove, it survives. Popper tears into the myth that science is about verification, about stacking up evidence until truth is secure. He insists that no matter how many times an idea is confirmed, it only takes one counterexample to destroy it. Truth, in this vision, is not a glowing endpoint. It's a battlefield. Theories don't ascend to certainty. They fight for their lives against the threat of falsification. If a claim cannot, even in principle, be proven wrong, it's not science. It's dogma in disguise. This philosophy is terrifying because it strips away comfort. It tells you that even your most trusted knowledge is temporary, provisional, on trial, and yet, in that fragility lies its power. Real science, Popper says, embraces uncertainty. It thrives on risk. It advances not by protecting itself, but by daring to be wrong. And once you see this, belief starts to feel heavier. Responsibility sharpens, because to think clearly is not to cling to what feels true, but to constantly ask what could destroy it. The logic of scientific discovery doesn't hand you a method. It demands a mindset, one built not on faith, but on fearless doubt. And if you're unwilling to let your ideas be tested, then you're not seeking truth. You're just hiding from it. The open society. The open society is one of the most impassioned, defiant rejections of tyranny ever written, a blazing defense of freedom, fallibility, and the moral courage it takes to live without certainty. Penned by Karl Popper in the shadow of totalitarian horror, it isn't just a critique of fascism or communism. It is a roar against every system, ancient or modern, that claims to possess the truth. At its core lies a fearless belief that the greatest danger to humanity is not error, but those who believe they are incapable of it. Popper takes a wrecking ball to the idols of history, Plato's utopia, Hegel's historical destiny, Marx's scientific socialism. To him, they are not visions of progress. They are blueprints for oppression, rooted in the seductive lie that history has a plan and the philosopher king knows where it leads. But when you believe your system is perfect, disagreement becomes treason, and from that soil, the closed society grows, rigid, tribal, authoritarian. The open society, by contrast, is a world built on humility. It does not worship tradition or revolution. It values critique over consensus, the individual over the tribe, change over purity. It is messy, uncomfortable, and endlessly self-correcting, but it is the only kind of society where people can breathe, where power can be questioned, where truth is never final, and where freedom is not a gift from rulers, but a responsibility we must fiercely protect. This book doesn't lull you with utopia. It demands vigilance, because the open society doesn't defend itself. It depends on you. And the moment you trade liberty for certainty, truth for ideology, or dissent for silence, the door begins to close, quietly, permanently. The poverty of historicism. The poverty of historicism is one of the most piercing rejections of intellectual complacency ever written, a philosophical firebomb hurled against the seductive lie that history follows a script. In this brutally clear work, Karl Popper tears apart the dream of inevitability, the comforting belief that society unfolds according to discoverable laws, like nature obeying gravity. At its core lies a dangerous truth. There is no destiny, no fixed arc, no guaranteed progress, only choices, risks, and the terrifying weight of freedom. Popper doesn't attack history. He attacks the misuse of it, the prophets, the planners, the ideologues who claim to see the future, who pretend to predict the rise and fall of civilizations, who justify tyranny with charts and theories. He shows how these historicists, whether Marxist, fascist, or utopian, do not seek to understand humanity. They seek to control it, and their visions always end the same way, in blood. What makes this philosophy so emotionally jarring is its sheer refusal to give in to false comfort. Popper insists that the future is not knowable because it depends on us, on the unpredictable eruption of ideas, on decisions that cannot be reduced to equations, on human creativity and its shadow, human cruelty. He dares you to stop hiding behind systems and take responsibility for uncertainty. The poverty of historicism does not mourn the absence of historical law. It celebrates it, because in that uncertainty lies the only real hope we have, that nothing is inevitable, not progress, not collapse, that we are not puppets of the past, but authors of something still unwritten, something that could still be free. Naming and necessity. Naming and Necessity is one of the most quietly volcanic works in modern philosophy, a deceptively small book that detonates the foundations of how we speak, think, and mean. Saul Kripke doesn't come with thunderous declarations. He comes with surgical questions, and at its core is a revolution buried in plain sight. A name is not just a label, it's a lifeline to reality. Kripke takes on centuries of assumption that words are mere descriptions, that meaning shifts with belief, that what we name is a fluid construct shaped by perception. He rips that apart with eerie calm. A name, he says, is not shorthand for qualities. It is a rigid designator. It points to a thing, that thing, and nothing else, regardless of what you know about it. If someone is named Aristotle, he is Aristotle, even if every fact you associate with him is wrong. The name sticks because the reference is real. But this is not just about language. It's about identity. It's about the terrifying permanence of reference in a world that feels endlessly shifting. Kripke shows how meaning can endure misunderstanding, how truth can live even beneath layers of confusion. And in doing so, he offers a glimpse of something rare in analytic philosophy, necessity that feels emotional, that names, spoken and shared through time, don't just float, they anchor us. Naming and necessity doesn't just rewire how you understand semantics. It pierces something deeper. It shows that behind every name we speak is a hidden thread of history, memory, and human intention. And when you feel that thread tighten, suddenly words matter more than ever before. Philosophical Investigations. Philosophical Investigations is one of the most quietly devastating books in all of philosophy, a work that doesn't shout its conclusions, but softly unravels your entire way of thinking, thread by thread. Ludwig Wittgenstein doesn't present a system, he presents a mirror, and what you see reflected is the terrifying realization that much of what you believe to be truth is nothing more than language playing tricks on your mind. At its core lies a revelation so subtle, so profound, it can dismantle centuries of philosophical arrogance. The meaning of a word is its use in the language, not its definition, not some pure idea behind it, but how it lives, how it's spoken, shared, twisted, misunderstood. Language in this light isn't a perfect tool. It's a messy living practice. We don't just use language, we live inside it. Wittgenstein shows that most philosophical problems aren't problems at all. They're illusions born from language being stretched too far, used outside the games it was meant for, like trying to use a saw to stir soup. And when we do that, we fall into confusion, not because reality is broken, but because we are trying to force it to fit a structure that was never there. This book doesn't offer answers, it offers therapy. It doesn't hand you truth, it clears away the fog so you can breathe again. It's unsettling because it doesn't give you anything to hold on to. It simply teaches you how to let go. And in that silence, where the need to explain dissolves, something rare happens. You begin to see the world as it is, not as you were taught to name it. The construction of social reality. The construction of social reality is one of the most quietly mind-shattering works of modern philosophy, a book that doesn't just explain society, but exposes it as a kind of mass hallucination we've all agreed to believe. In this deceptively calm masterpiece, John Searle takes the ordinary, money, marriage, borders, governments, and reveals their terrifying secret. They aren't real in the way we think they are. They are not found in nature. They are not laws of physics. They exist because we collectively pretend they do. At its core is a seismic insight. Human beings create facts that aren't physical, but act like they are. This paper is money. That man is president. This land belongs to you. None of these things are objectively true, but they work because enough people believe in the web of language, intention, and recognition that sustains them. These are institutional facts, powered not by nature, but by agreement. But what makes Searle's philosophy so emotionally disruptive is what it implies. If these realities are constructed, they can be deconstructed, they can break, they can be rewritten. Every law you obey, every title you carry, every value you inherit, it all lives inside a fragile system of shared belief. And when those beliefs fracture, the entire world you know can collapse. The construction of social reality doesn't deny the importance of society. It shows its vulnerability. It forces you to see that behind the stability of everyday life lies a ghost, held together by speech acts, expectations, and trust. And if that trust falters, if the story loses its grip, even the most solid-seeming institutions can vanish like mist. The idea of justice. The idea of justice is one of the most humane and soul-stirring confrontations with inequality ever written, a work that doesn't begin in theory, but in pain. Amartya Sen doesn't try to build a flawless system. He looks out at a wounded world and asks a different question, not what perfect justice looks like, but what we can do about injustice right now. At its core lies a radical rejection of paralysis. We don't need utopia to act. We need empathy, reason, and the will to listen. Sen breaks from tradition, not by attacking it, but by refusing to stay frozen in its elegance. He moves beyond John Rawls, beyond imagined contracts behind veils of ignorance, and focuses instead on real lives, real suffering. He shows that justice is not an abstract blueprint waiting to be built. It is a lived experience, shifting and complex. And to pursue it, we must compare what exists, not against perfection, but against something better. The most devastating insight in this philosophy is that injustice doesn't need to be absolute to matter. We don't have to fix everything to fix something. Sen teaches that freedom is not just the absence of constraint, it's the presence of opportunity. That fairness is not symmetry, it's dignity. That justice is not an idea we admire from afar, it's a responsibility we carry into every conversation, every institution, every decision. The idea of justice doesn't offer closure, it demands courage. The courage to speak even when we don't have all the answers. The courage to act even when perfection is out of reach. Because the choice is never between justice and nothing. The choice is always between better and silence. Ethics and infinity. Ethics and infinity is one of the most soul-quieting and morally destabilizing conversations ever captured. A dialogue so intimate it feels like prayer, yet so demanding it shakes the foundation of everything you thought ethics was. In the voice of Emmanuel Levinas, morality is no longer a set of rules or outcomes. It is a trembling responsibility that begins the moment you see another face. At its core lies a seismic claim. The other is infinite, and I am responsible for them before I am even myself. This isn't poetic exaggeration, it's ethical fire. Levinas insists that ethics does not start in thought, but in encounter. The face of the other, naked, vulnerable, irreducibly human, is not just something you see. It calls to you. It commands you, not with force, but with need. And you cannot escape. You cannot stand neutral. You are summoned. Before you think, before you speak, before you choose, you are already obligated. This obliterates comfort, because Levinas doesn't care what your beliefs are, what your intentions were, what philosophy you follow. He cares only what you do when someone else's pain confronts you. And in that moment, you are not an individual. You are not free. You are hostage to their suffering. Ethics and infinity doesn't invite you to be good. It dares you to be human. It shows that infinity isn't somewhere out there in the stars. It's in the gaze of the one who looks to you, who needs you, who wounds you simply by existing. And in that gaze, you are undone. Not because you are weak, but because to be truly moral is to answer a cry you never gave yourself permission to ignore. The blue and brown books. The blue and brown books are among the most quietly disorienting and intellectually intimate documents in modern philosophy. Not official treatises, but fragments of Ludwig Wittgenstein's evolving mind, sketched in the margins between certainty and surrender. At their core lies a revelation that doesn't break the rules of thought. It reveals that the rules were illusions all along. The problem is not the world. It's the way we use language to trap ourselves in misunderstanding. Wittgenstein speaks not like a prophet, but like a teacher trying to wake you up without shaking you. He shows how language, when misused, becomes a hall of mirrors where we mistake our own reflections for deep truths. We get lost in abstract questions like, what is time? Or, what is meaning? And he gently asks, but how do we actually use these words in life? He invites you back to the ground, to where language lives, not in dictionaries, but in action, behavior, expression. What makes these notebooks so quietly devastating is their method. They don't argue, they dissolve, they don't tell you what to think. They walk you to the edge of your confusion and ask you to look, really look, at what's already in front of you. The mistake isn't that we don't know enough, it's that we've forgotten what it means to understand. Reading the blue and brown books is like peeling away layers of thought until you're left with something bare, uncomfortable, and true. That meaning isn't hidden, it's public. That philosophy isn't about answers, it's about clarity. And that, often, the thing that torments us is not the world itself, but the words we try to force it into. The postmodern condition. The postmodern condition is one of the most disorienting and electrifying manifestos ever unleashed against the architecture of modern thought, a philosophy that doesn't offer solutions, but detonates certainties. In this razor-sharp work, Jean-François Lyotard doesn't just question authority, he questions the very structure of knowledge. At its core lies a devastating insight. The grand narratives are dead. The sweeping stories of progress, reason, science, and salvation that once held civilization together, they no longer hold. Lyotard doesn't mourn this collapse. He exposes it. He shows how, in the postmodern age, knowledge is no longer about truth. It's about power, about who controls the language games, about who gets to define what counts as knowledge in the first place. Universities, governments, corporations, these aren't neutral platforms for truth. They're battlegrounds of legitimacy. And in this fractured landscape, certainty is no longer possible. Only fragments, competing voices, and an endless loop of questioning. What makes the postmodern condition so emotionally jarring is its quiet violence. It doesn't scream, it erodes. It pulls the floor out from under your faith in objectivity, in authority, in the comforting notion that the world makes sense if we just find the right system. It says there is no final system, no ultimate map, just temporary rules, shifting contexts, and voices that clash without resolution. But in that uncertainty, Lyotard finds a strange kind of freedom. If no one story can dominate, then every voice has a chance to speak. And the game isn't to find the truth, but to keep the conversation alive, to resist closure, to stay awake in the ambiguity. And in that restlessness, perhaps, lies the only real honesty left. Totality and infinity. Totality and infinity is one of the most disarming and spiritually aching philosophies ever written. A book that doesn't begin with systems or structures, but with a face. Emmanuel Levinas doesn't argue that ethics is a branch of philosophy. He whispers, in words that tremble with urgency, that ethics is the beginning of all philosophy, and not abstract ethics, but the unbearable, infinite responsibility you feel the moment you encounter the other. At its core is a quiet revolution, that the foundation of meaning is not logic, not power, not even freedom, but relation. The other is not an object to be understood, absorbed, or categorized. The other is a mystery that resists you, and the moment you meet their gaze, the moment you see them not as a function of your world, but as a world of their own, you are summoned, you are called, and you cannot hide. Levinas calls this the face, not the skin or expression, but the silent demand that presence makes on you. The face doesn't plead, it commands without force. It says, "You shall not kill me," and even more, "You are responsible for me before you even chose to be." There is no symmetry in this relation, no escape into justice as balance. You are forever before the other, answering, exposed, awake. What makes totality and infinity so devastating is how gently it destroys autonomy. You do not encounter people after you build yourself. You are built by that encounter. You are made through responsibility. You are not a closed totality. You are torn open by the infinity in every stranger's eyes. And in that wound, Levinas says, you find the only truth that matters, the demand to care, without condition, without end. Difference and repetition. Difference and repetition is one of the most disorienting, mind-expanding acts of philosophical rebellion ever written. A book that doesn't just challenge how we think, but what thought itself even is. With the force of a thunderclap disguised as logic, Gilles Deleuze tears apart centuries of assumption, and at its core, he delivers an idea that is both ecstatic and terrifying. True difference is not deviation from sameness. It is its own kind of force, its own kind of fire. For too long, Deleuze argues, we've been trapped in the machinery of identity. We categorize, we compare, we reduce. Everything becomes a repetition of something, a copy, a model, an imitation, and in that endless loop of sameness, we forget to see what pulses beneath, the wild, irreducible power of difference itself. Real repetition, he says, isn't about returning to what was. It's about the emergence of something new each time, something that can never be fully predicted, never fully explained. Deleuze doesn't write to be understood. He writes to disrupt. His language fractures, spirals, folds back on itself. Because he's not giving you concepts, he's forcing you into an experience of thinking differently. And in that destabilization, something breathtaking happens. The world stops being a stage of fixed roles and categories and starts to become a field of pure becoming. Difference and repetition doesn't offer clarity. It offers transformation. It says that freedom doesn't lie in breaking the rules. It lies in breaking the logic that created them. And once you feel that difference, not as a variation, but as a birth, you realize repetition is not the return of the same. It is the insistence of something that refuses to be forgotten. Anti-Oedipus. Anti-Oedipus is one of the most incendiary, mind-warping rejections of modern thought ever written. A philosophy that doesn't just challenge psychoanalysis, capitalism, and identity, but sets them on fire. In this feverish text, Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari do not offer a critique. They offer a jailbreak. At its core lies a revolutionary scream. You are not a trapped child in Freud's theater of repression. You are a machine of desire, wild, messy, and unstoppable. The book tears through everything we've been taught to believe about ourselves. You are not a coherent ego, not a broken subject waiting to be fixed. You are a network of flows, of energy, cravings, drives that don't fit into boxes. Desire is not lack. It's not a symptom. It's production. It builds, it connects, it mutates. And the worst crime of both capitalism and psychoanalysis is that they chain it, force it into roles, families, Oedipal fantasies, and consumer loops until it forgets how to run free. But what makes anti-Oedipus so emotionally volatile is how close it cuts to your deepest confusion. It says your pain, your fragmentation, your madness, they're not signs of failure. They are signs of revolt, signs that something in you refuses to be reduced, to be normalized, to be told what you are. The problem is not chaos. The problem is control. This work doesn't want to be understood. It wants to be felt. It wants to scramble the codes that define you and awaken something primal beneath the identity you've been sold. Because beneath the repression, beneath the roles, there is a scream of life, raw, non-linear, untamed, and anti-Oedipus dares you to let it speak. Capitalism and schizophrenia. Capitalism and schizophrenia is one of the most explosive and mind-melting philosophical projects of the 20th century. a 2-volume insurgency that doesn't just critique society, but seeks to dismantle the very blueprint of how we think. Written by Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari, this philosophy does not walk, it detonates. At its core is a furious claim. Capitalism is not a system we live under. It is a logic that lives inside us. And madness, they argue, is not a disease to be cured, but a symptom of being too alive for a world that cannot contain it. Across its 2 volumes, Anti-Oedipus and 1,000 Plateaus, this work fuses economics, psychoanalysis, politics, and metaphysics into something that reads less like theory and more like a fever dream. It tells you that your mind has been colonized by structures, by capitalism, by psychiatry, by the family, by the need to fit into machines that profit from your obedience. You are told to desire what society wants, to behave, to consume, to obey Freud's map of your soul like it's a prison schedule. But what makes capitalism and schizophrenia so soul-rattling is its vision of escape. Deleuze and Guattari don't want you to rebel. They want you to deterritorialize, to break down, to become unrecognizable. They dream of the body without organs, the rhizome, the fractured self that can't be mapped or tamed. This isn't chaos, it's liberation, a schizophrenic freedom that doesn't ask permission to exist. This philosophy isn't for understanding, it's for undoing. It wants to burn the scripts written into your bones and let desire write new ones, not to heal you, but to show that maybe, just maybe, you were never broken to begin with. Simulacra and simulation. Simulacra and simulation is one of the most disorienting, mind-shattering philosophies ever conceived, a work that doesn't ask if reality is fake, but whether reality still matters at all. In this eerie, hypnotic text, Jean Baudrillard tears the veil from modern life and reveals something far more disturbing than illusion, a world where illusion has replaced the real so perfectly we can no longer tell the difference. At its core is a terrifying idea. We no longer live in reality. We live in a simulation of reality, and we don't even notice. Baudrillard calls it hyperreality, a condition where signs, images, and media don't represent anything real. They simulate meaning, they mimic life, and in doing so, they replace it. We scroll, consume, perform, and believe not in truths, but in representations. Politicians become brands, news becomes theater, social media becomes self, the symbol devours the substance, and in the end, nothing is false, because nothing is true. What makes simulacra and simulation so emotionally unsettling is that it doesn't accuse us, it reflects us. It shows us how much we crave the comfort of the copy, how we've learned to love surfaces more than depth, image more than presence. It whispers that we may not want the real anymore, that we've chosen the simulation because it's safer, smoother, more seductive. Baudrillard doesn't offer a way out. He offers a mirror, one that doesn't show you your face, but 1,000 filtered versions of it glowing behind a screen. And when you stare into it long enough, you realize the most chilling part. The simulation doesn't need to deceive you. You're already playing along. The ethics of care. The ethics of care is one of the most quietly radical philosophies ever to challenge the foundations of morality, not by shouting, but by noticing. It begins not in courts, contracts, or calculated consequences, but in the soft spaces the world forgets. A mother tending to her child, a friend holding silence for grief, a nurse staying past her shift for someone who has no one. At its core is a tender, explosive truth. Care is not weakness. It is the moral heart of being human. Emerging from feminist thought and voices long silenced, this philosophy doesn't reject reason. It reclaims what reason has excluded. It asks, why have we built our moral ideals on autonomy and abstraction while neglecting dependence, emotion, and relationship? Why have we defined justice in terms of fairness, but ignored the sacred weight of responsibility to one another? The ethics of care refuses to see people as isolated agents making clean choices. It sees them as entangled, fragile, vulnerable, bound in webs of love, pain, memory, and obligation. It tells you that morality is not just about rules, it's about response, about noticing the need in someone's voice, about staying when leaving would be easier, about seeing dignity not in independence, but in connection. What makes this philosophy so piercing is its courage to treat softness as strength, to say that the everyday, invisible labor of care is not beneath moral theory, it is moral theory. And once you understand that, the world looks different, louder voices fade, and you begin to hear something else, something quieter, deeper, asking, who needs you now and what will you do?